This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I don't usually share personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. It happened last winter, and I still think about it constantly. I've always been pretty confident about my safety. I'm 6'3", athletic, and in my late 20s. I've never felt particularly vulnerable walking alone at night, but after what happened that night in December, I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe again. For context, I work nights at a data center, which has completely messed up my sleep schedule. I usually get home around 4 in the morning, sleep until noon, and then have this weird chunk of time before my next shift. To clear my head and get some exercise, I developed this habit of taking long walks around 8 p.m. The cold winter air helped wake me up before work, and the streets were usually pretty empty by then. That night was particularly cold, maybe 20 degrees with this biting wind that cut right through my jacket. I remember putting on my heaviest coat, a beanie, and these thick gloves my mom had given me the previous Christmas. I grabbed my headphones, queued up this true crime podcast I'd been into, ironic I know, and headed out. My usual route took me across this old steel bridge that connects my residential neighborhood to the more commercial part of the city. It's about a 15-minute walk to the bridge and another 20 minutes or so through the city center. The bridge itself is pretty long, maybe a quarter mile, with these tall lampposts that cast this eerie yellow glow on the walkway. There's something unsettling about crossing it at night, with the black water flowing beneath and the wind whistling through the metal beams. But I'd done it so many times that I barely noticed anymore. As I approached the first intersection after crossing the bridge, I noticed a woman standing alone at the corner. She was just standing there, not waiting to cross, not looking at her phone, just standing. Something about her posture seemed off. She wasn't hunched against the cold like you'd expect on a freezing night. Instead, she stood perfectly straight, occasionally glancing around. When I got closer, she started casting these quick looks in my direction. Not making eye contact exactly, more like sizing me up from her peripheral vision. I lowered the volume on my podcast, suddenly feeling weirdly self-conscious. As I passed by, I got a better look at her. She had on this knitted hat with these childish little tassels hanging down, a thin sweater that seemed completely inadequate for the weather, tight jeans, and, this is the detail that first struck me as odd, a small plastic children's backpack, like the kind kindergartners wear, bright pink with some cartoon character I didn't recognize. I initially thought she was a teenager, but as I got closer, I realized she was definitely older, probably late 20s or early 30s. She was thin, average height, with short light brown hair peeking out from under her hat. Her skin was really pale, almost sickly looking in the streetlight. I kept walking, trying not to stare, and continued on my route through the Central Park. The park was completely deserted, which wasn't unusual for that time on a winter night. The paths were dimly lit, and the trees created these long, stretching shadows across the walkways. I remember feeling relieved when I emerged on the other side, heading back toward the bridge. After about 45 minutes of walking, I decided to head home. I turned a corner onto one of the streets leading back to the bridge and nearly collided with someone. It was the same woman from the intersection. I instinctively stepped back and muttered, "Sorry," but she didn't respond. She just took a step back under the streetlight, still avoiding direct eye contact, but stealing these quick glances at me. That's when the first real wave of unease hit me. I'd been walking for nearly an hour in a big loop. Logically, if she'd been heading somewhere when I first saw her, she should have been in the complete opposite direction by now. But here she was, on the exact street I needed to take to get back to the bridge. I decided to keep walking, maintaining what I hoped was a casual pace. Within seconds, I could hear footsteps behind me. She was following me, but her stride was weird. It was too energetic, almost bouncy, completely at odds with the late hour and freezing temperature. I picked up my pace slightly, and so did she. When I reached the crosswalk before the bridge, she suddenly overtook me, moving to the corner where the pedestrian button was located. I stood a few feet away, pretending to check my phone while watching her from the corner of my eye. She squatted down, not sat, but squatted in this uncomfortable-looking position and started rifling through that pink backpack. It seemed performative somehow, like she wasn't actually looking for anything, just buying time. When the light changed, she darted ahead of me onto the bridge walkway, moving quickly until she was about 50 feet ahead, where the shadows between streetlights were deepest. Then she seemed to vanish. I slowed down, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. The bridge felt different now, threatening. The wind seemed louder, the water below darker. I considered turning back, maybe finding another route home or calling an Uber, but that would mean walking back through those empty streets. The bridge was at least partially lit, and I was already halfway across. As I passed one of the buildings at the end of the bridge with these mirror-like windows, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. In the reflection, I could see her silhouette sprinting toward me from behind. She wasn't making any sound, no footsteps, no heavy breathing, just silently running straight at my reflection. Pure instinct took over. I spun around to face her, which seemed to catch her off guard. She skidded to a halt just a few feet away from me. Under the nearest streetlight, I could see her face clearly for the first time. Her eyes looked wild and frantic, darting all over me like she was calculating something. She was gripping something small in her right hand, though I couldn't make out what it was. We stood there in this terrifying standoff for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Neither of us spoke. I was too shocked to even think of what to say, and she just stared with this unsettling intensity. I remember noticing that she wasn't breathing heavily at all, despite having just sprinted toward me. The moment was broken when a car drove past on the bridge, its headlights briefly illuminating both of us. I took that opportunity to finally speak. "What do you want?" I shouted, trying to sound confident but hearing the fear in my own voice. She didn't answer, didn't even react to my words. She just kept staring at me with those wild eyes, still clutching whatever it was in her hand. I started backing away slowly, not wanting to turn my back to her again. She remained perfectly still, watching me retreat. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, something changed in her demeanor. It was like a switch flipped. The intensity in her eyes dimmed, and she abruptly looked away, crossing to the other side of the bridge and disappearing around a corner. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I practically ran the rest of the way home, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally reached my apartment building, I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. My roommate was home, and he immediately knew something was wrong. I told him what happened, and he insisted we call the police. They took a report, but didn't seem particularly concerned. Just another weird encounter in the city at night. They said they'd keep an eye out for someone matching her description, but I never heard anything back. What disturbs me most, even now, isn't just the encounter itself, but the methodical nature of it. The way she positioned herself on my route home, the way she seemed to be testing me, seeing how I'd react, the casual way she abandoned what seemed like a planned ambush once that car drove by. It felt calculated, like I'd narrowly avoided being part of some terrible plan. I've spent countless hours trying to make sense of it. Was she mentally ill? On drugs? Was she planning to rob me? Attack me? Was that small object in her hand a weapon? Or was it something else entirely, something I can't even imagine? I never take that route anymore. I don't go for night walks at all, actually. I bought a treadmill for my apartment instead. Sometimes I catch myself scanning crowds, looking for her face, that pale skin and those wild eyes. I've never seen her again, but I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, waiting at some dark intersection, following someone else home. The police never found her. No similar incidents were reported. It's like she appeared for that one night, targeted me specifically, and then vanished. And I still have no idea what would have happened if that car hadn't driven by when it did. Story 2. I've been delaying writing this down for months now. The memories haunt me nightly, and perhaps putting them to paper will grant me some peace. I doubt it, but here goes. It was early March of 1891 when Governor Ashbury's telegram reached me in Edinburgh. I'd just returned from a 3-month expedition in India and was looking forward to some rest. The message was urgent. A man-eating lion was terrorizing settlements in the Luangwa Valley of northern Rhodesia. Dozens dead already. The beast needed to be stopped. I've hunted dangerous game across 3 continents, but something in Ashbury's desperate tone made me uneasy. Still, duty called. I telegraphed Jack Thompson, my assistant and dear friend of 15 years, to meet me at Southampton within the week. Poor Jack. His wife Margaret begged him not to go. I still remember her tearful eyes at the dock, clutching their youngest to her chest, while the older 2 clung to their father's legs. "It's just another hunt," he assured them. "I'll be back before summer." If only I'd heeded Margaret's concerns. If only I'd gone alone. Our journey to Africa was uneventful. 23 days by steamer to Cape Town, then inland by rail and finally by cart. The deeper we traveled into the continent, the more unsettling the reports became. Villages abandoned, livestock slaughtered, bodies found in pieces, sometimes just parts missing, as if the predator was toying with its prey rather than hunting for food. We reached the Luangwa Valley in mid-April. The official who was supposed to meet us, a colonial administrator named Perkins, was dead. Killed 3 nights before our arrival. The remaining villagers had fled, leaving behind their homes and possessions in panic. "What manner of lion does this?" Jack whispered as we surveyed the silent village. Blood stained the ground near a collapsed hut. Inside, we found what remained of Perkins. I've seen lion attacks before, but this was different. The man hadn't just been killed. He'd been torn apart with calculated fury. We established a base camp 5 miles downriver, near a small settlement that hadn't yet been attacked. I hired local trackers, though few were willing to join us. They called the beast Mwezi wa Imfa, Moonlight Death, claiming it was no ordinary lion, but a demon in animal form. "Superstitious nonsense," I told Jack that night as we sat by the fire. "Every region has its monster myths. This is just an old, clever lion that's developed a taste for human flesh." Jack wasn't convinced. "The attacks don't follow normal patterns, Charles. Lions don't typically break into sturdy huts or drag victims for miles, only to leave them uneaten." I dismissed his concerns. After all, I'd killed man-eaters before. How different could this one be? The next morning, we began tracking the beast southward along the river where the most recent attacks had occurred. The spoor was enormous, paw prints larger than any lion I'd previously encountered. We followed for miles until the trail went cold at a rocky outcropping. That evening, a messenger arrived from a village 15 miles north. There had been an attack the previous night, 3 dead, including a child. But that was impossible. The lion we were tracking had been moving south, not north. Perhaps there are 2, Jack suggested, working together. I laughed, though uneasily. Lions don't coordinate complex hunting strategies across vast territories. But over the next week, the evidence became undeniable. Attacks occurred simultaneously in villages separated by impossible distances. We weren't hunting one man-eater, we were hunting 2. And somehow, they were working in tandem, with one striking in the south while the other attacked in the north. The locals grew more terrified. These weren't just lions, they insisted. They were spirits of vengeful warriors killed during tribal wars, returned to punish the living. I remained skeptical, but after witnessing the aftermath of their attacks, even my rational mind began to waver. These creatures were unnaturally cunning. They avoided traps, circumvented watchers, and struck precisely where defenses were weakest. They killed not just for food, but seemingly for sport or revenge. Sometimes they'd drag a victim away, only to leave the body displayed prominently for others to find. After 2 weeks of fruitless hunting, I made a fateful decision. We would split up. I would continue tracking the southern beast, while Jack would head north to protect the villages there. It was risky, dividing our already small force, but more people would die if we didn't act. "Be careful," I told Jack as we parted ways. "No heroics. If you find it, send word and wait for reinforcements." He nodded, that familiar determined look in his eyes. "Same to you, old friend. I'll see you in a week." Those were the last words we ever exchanged. For 3 days, I tracked the southern lion, drawing closer each day. On the 4th morning, I found fresh kills, 2 goats barely touched. The beast was near. I set up a blind near the carcasses and waited. Just after dusk, it appeared. Even expecting its size, I was stunned. The creature stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, its mane dark and matted with dried blood. But it was the eyes that froze my blood, yellow-green and gleaming with an intelligence that seemed impossible for an animal. I raised my rifle, taking careful aim. The lion turned, staring directly at me, though I was well hidden. It knew I was there. Somehow, it knew. I fired. The shot struck true, right in the chest where the heart should be. The beast staggered but didn't fall. It roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very air, and charged. I fired again and again. 4 shots in total, each one hitting vital areas. The monster slowed, finally collapsing mere feet from my position. Even dying, it kept those unnatural eyes fixed on me. With its last breath, it made a sound that still haunts me. Not a roar or growl, but something almost like human laughter. I approached cautiously, rifle ready. The beast was massive, easily 600 pounds. As I stood over it, a cold realization washed over me. If the southern lion was here, then the northern one was. A messenger reached me the next morning, exhausted and terrified. There had been an attack at the village where Jack was stationed. Many dead, including Jack. I rode north without stopping, reaching the village by nightfall. The scene that greeted me will haunt me until my dying day. Bodies lay scattered across the central clearing, huts burned. The survivors huddled together, jumping at every sound from the surrounding darkness. They told me what happened. The lion had come just after sunset, larger and more ferocious than the first. It had broken through the village's defenses as if they weren't there. Jack had organized the villagers, getting women and children into the sturdiest building while he and several men tried to drive the beast away. They'd succeeded, briefly. Then, as the creature retreated into the bush, Jack had followed, determined to end the threat. They heard shots, then screams, then silence. I found him at dawn, 200 yards into the thick brush. He'd emptied his rifle into the beast, wounding it severely, but not severely enough. Jack's body was, God, I can't even describe it, but his face was untouched, eerily peaceful amidst the carnage. In his hand was his hunting knife, its blade broken off. He'd fought to the very end. The lion's trail led away from the village, heavy drops of blood marking its path. It was wounded, perhaps mortally, but still moving. I followed alone, refusing all offers of company. This had become personal. For 2 days I tracked it, barely stopping to eat or rest. The blood trail grew heavier. The beast was weakening. On the morning of the 3rd day, I found it. Unlike its southern counterpart, this lion was pale, almost white, with scars covering its massive frame. It lay beside a small stream, breathing laboriously, blood pooling beneath it. Jack's bullets had done their work, but slowly. As I approached, rifle raised, it turned those same intelligent eyes toward me. There was no fear there, only a cold hatred that seemed to pierce my very soul. I fired once, ending its suffering. Only then did I notice what lay beside the creature. Jack's broken knife blade, still lodged deep in its throat. My friend had wounded it fatally, even as it took his life. His sacrifice had saved countless others and given me the chance to finish what we'd started. I fulfilled my grim duty of writing to Margaret, trying to convey the bravery with which her husband had faced death. I arranged for Jack's remains to be returned to England with all expenses covered by the governor who had summoned us to this cursed place. The locals insist both lions were supernatural beings. I tell myself they were just unusually intelligent predators. But sometimes, in the dark of night, I remember those eyes, knowing, hating, almost human, and I wonder. What haunts me most isn't the memory of those monstrous cats. It's the knowledge that I brought Jack to his death, that I split our party when we should have stayed together, that Margaret's tears at Southampton Harbor were prophetic, while my confidence was misplaced. I've hunted my last lion. I've returned to Scotland and put away my rifles. Sometimes I wake screaming, imagining those yellow-green eyes watching me from the darkness of my bedroom. Sometimes I think I hear that human-like laughter carried on the night wind. And always, always, I see Jack's face as we parted ways that final time. "See you in a week," he said. "I never will, not in this life." Story 3. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and my therapist says writing it all down might help me process what happened. So here goes. I work at Walmart, or I should say worked, since I transferred to a different location after all this went down. I was in the electronics department, which I actually liked because it was usually pretty chill, especially during my regular night shifts. The store wasn't one of those 24-hour ones, but we closed at 11 p.m., and I'd typically work from 2 in the afternoon until around 10:30 at night. This happened back in March, just a few months ago. It was a Wednesday night, which are typically dead. I remember it was raining, and the fluorescent lights seemed extra harsh against the darkness outside the windows. I was straightening up the video game cases, counting down the minutes until I could clock out when I first noticed him. Just a guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark blue hoodie and jeans. Nothing remarkable about him except that he kept hovering at the edge of my department, pretending to look at computer mice or phone chargers, but I could feel him watching me. Working retail, you develop this sixth sense about people. There's a difference between someone actually shopping and someone just lingering. At first, I tried to ignore it. Retail attracts all kinds of weirdos, and usually if you don't engage, they move on. But after about 20 minutes, I realized he was still there, just drifting between the nearby aisles, always keeping me in his line of sight. I decided to be proactive, customer service and all that. Finding everything okay, I called over to him. He muttered something I couldn't hear and disappeared around the corner. I figured that was that. 10 minutes later, I spotted him again, this time by the DVD section. He wasn't holding anything, wasn't even pretending to shop anymore, just watching. Something about his expression made my skin crawl, completely blank, like he was studying an object rather than a person. I reached for my radio to call my supervisor, Kevin. The battery light was flashing red, which was weird because I'd just grabbed it from the charger at the beginning of my shift. When I pressed the talk button, nothing happened. Dead. Our store had been having issues with the walkies lately, management too cheap to replace them, so I wasn't immediately alarmed. Annoyed, yes, but not scared. Not yet. I figured I'd just walk up to customer service and use the phone there to page Kevin. As I was about to leave my department, I noticed Blue Hoodie Guy had moved again, positioning himself near the main aisle I'd need to take to reach the front. His hands were in his pockets, and now I could see he had a phone clipped to his belt. Something about the way it was positioned made me think it might be recording. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't normal, weird customer behavior anymore. I changed direction, heading toward the back of the department where there was another, less direct route to the front. That's when it happened. "Marcus! Oh my God!" A woman's voice, loud and excited, like someone spotting an old friend. Before I could even react, this woman I had never seen before in my life was grabbing my arm, squeezing it way too tight. She was maybe in her 30s, shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a green jacket. "It's been forever," she gushed, pulling me into an awkward half-hug. Her grip on my arm was like a vice. I opened my mouth to tell her she had the wrong person, but she leaned in close to my ear and whispered urgently, "That man has been recording you. Just play along and follow me." My blood went cold. I glanced back over my shoulder and saw Blue Hoodie Guy staring directly at us, his expression now visibly annoyed. Something about the intensity of his gaze made me believe her instantly. "Yeah, wow, it's been ages," I said loudly, forcing a smile. "How have you been?" She launched into this rambling fake catch-up conversation, still gripping my arm, steering me away from electronics and toward the grocery section. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept glancing back, and every time I did, I could see Blue Hoodie Guy following at a distance, pretending to shop now, picking up random items and putting them back. "Thank you," I whispered when we were in the cereal aisle. "I should find my manager and—" "No time," she cut me off, still smiling that fake smile. "He's got friends in the store. We need to get you out of here." That should have been my first warning sign. But I was so rattled by the guy following me that I just nodded and let her continue leading me through the store. We made our way past housewares, her chattering the whole time about nothing, keeping up the act. I noticed she was taking us toward the back of the store, away from the busy front registers where there were other employees and customers. "I think we should just go to customer service," I finally said, trying to pull my arm free. "My manager can call security." Her grip tightened painfully. "Trust me, "That's not a good idea," she said, her voice suddenly lower, harder. The friendly expression flickered, replaced by something cold and calculated before she forced the smile back. My stomach dropped. Something was very wrong here. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, planting my feet. "Loading dock," she said. "My car's parked back there. I can drive you home." The loading dock, the area with no security cameras. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. She wasn't helping me at all. I yanked my arm hard, breaking her grip. "I don't even know you," I said, loudly enough that a customer browsing nearby looked over. Her expression changed completely. The friendly mask disappeared, replaced by something predatory. "Marcus," she said quietly, "don't make a scene. Just come with me now." My name. She knew my name. I wasn't wearing a name tag. Our department used generic electronics badges instead of personalized ones. I backed away, bumping into a display of paper towels. "How do you know my name?" She reached for me again, her movements suddenly more urgent. "We have to go now. He's waiting." That was all I needed to hear. I shoved past her and ran. Not toward the back of the store where the break room was. I had a feeling Blue Hoodie Guy might be circling around that way, but straight toward the front registers. "Help!" I shouted, running past startled customers. "Someone call security!" I heard her behind me, not running but walking quickly. "Marcus!" she called, her voice a perfect mixture of concern and confusion. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She was good, really good. If someone had been watching, it would have looked like I was the crazy one, running from a concerned friend. I reached the front, registers, panting, and grabbed the first manager I saw, Diane from apparel. "There's a man following me," I gasped. "And that woman." I turned to point, but the woman in the green jacket was gone. Vanished. Blue Hoodie Guy was nowhere to be seen either. Diane looked concerned but skeptical. "Let's go to the office and review the security footage," she said. In the cramped security office, the loss prevention guy, Tom, rewound the tapes. There I was, working in electronics. And there was Blue Hoodie Guy, lingering exactly as I'd described. The footage clearly showed him following me, positioning himself to watch me from different angles. "That's definitely suspicious behavior," Tom agreed, frowning at the screen. Then we saw the woman enter the frame. The timestamp showed she'd entered the store about 40 minutes before approaching me, and she hadn't come in alone. The security footage showed her walking in with Blue Hoodie Guy. They'd separated immediately inside, but the entrance camera had caught them arriving in the same car, a dark sedan with obscured plates. "They were working together," I whispered, feeling sick. We watched as she approached me, as I left with her. The cameras tracked us through the store, showing her steering me increasingly toward the back, toward the loading dock, which, as I'd suspected, was a blind spot in the store's security system. Most chilling of all was Blue Hoodie Guy's movement pattern. As we watched the footage, it became clear he was systematically covering exits, positioning himself to intercept me if I tried to run in certain directions. "This was planned," Tom said grimly, picking up the phone to call the police. The cops arrived 20 minutes later. They took my statement, reviewed the footage, and launched an investigation. Blue Hoodie Guy's face was clearly visible on several cameras, but the woman had kept her face angled away from most cameras, and the ones that did catch her showed her wearing large sunglasses for part of the time. They found the car on other security cameras from nearby businesses, a dark Nissan with stolen plates. It had been reported abandoned the next morning about 30 miles away. The police think they were human traffickers. They told me these operations are getting more sophisticated, with teams working together to isolate targets. The fact that the woman knew my name suggests they'd been watching me for some time, maybe following me before, learning my schedule. I couldn't sleep for weeks after. I kept replaying it all in my mind, how close I'd come to following her to that loading dock. What would have happened if I hadn't realized something was wrong? Would anyone have even known what happened to me? I transferred to another Walmart location across town and switched to day shifts only. I never walk to my car alone. I vary my routes home. I check the back seat before getting in my car. The police haven't caught them. They identified blue hoodie guy from the security footage. He has priors for assault and attempted kidnapping, but they haven't found him. The woman remains unidentified. Sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched. Maybe I am. Maybe they're still out there waiting for another opportunity. All I know is that my instincts saved me that night, and I'll never ignore that feeling in my gut again. So if you're working retail, especially late shifts, please be careful. Pay attention to people who linger too long. Don't trust strangers who seem too friendly. And if someone you don't know calls you by name, run. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. What happened to us in Plumas National Forest last summer changed me forever. I still have nightmares about it, and I can't look at hiking trails the same way. It was supposed to be a fun weekend trip. Just me, Sarah, Alex, and Mike, friends since college who try to do one outdoor adventure every summer. We'd been planning this particular hike for weeks, mapping our route through what we thought would be a beautiful, peaceful section of the forest. We'd researched campgrounds, packed all the right gear, and even splurged on those fancy freeze-dried meals. The day started perfectly. Clear blue skies, about 75 degrees, ideal hiking weather. We arrived at the trailhead parking lot around 9 in the morning. The lot was almost empty except for a couple of cars at the far end. I remember feeling this surge of excitement as we shouldered our packs. Sarah was taking photos of everything, already talking about which ones she'd post later. Alex, always the responsible one, double-checked our map and made sure everyone had filled their water bottles. We set off in great spirits. The main trail was well maintained and clearly marked with those blue blazes on the trees. I remember feeling so at peace, listening to birds chirping and our boots crunching on the dirt path. Mike was telling us about his new job. Sarah was identifying plants she recognized. Normal stuff, safe stuff. About an hour in, we stopped at a clearing to have some trail mix and adjust our packs. That's when he approached us. He came from the direction we were heading, walking alone. A guy maybe in his mid-30s, tall and wiry with a scraggly beard. He was wearing faded hiking clothes and carrying a small day pack. Nothing particularly alarming about him, but something in his eyes made me uneasy right away. They were too intense, too focused. I can't explain it exactly. "Beautiful day for a hike," he said, stopping near our group. His voice was friendly enough, but it had this forced quality to it. We all nodded and smiled politely. You know how it is on trails. You acknowledge fellow hikers, maybe exchange a few words, then move on. But this guy didn't move on. "You folks heading to Indian Falls?" he asked, pointing down the main trail. Alex nodded. "That's the plan. We're going to camp near there tonight." The man shook his head. "That area's gotten really crowded lately. Too many tourists." He gestured to a barely visible path branching off from the main trail about 50 yards ahead. "If you take that side trail, it leads to a much prettier waterfall, completely secluded. Most people don't know about it." I felt a weird sensation in my stomach when he said that. Sarah must have felt something too, because she glanced at me with a slight frown. "Is it on the map?" Alex asked, pulling out his trail guide. The man waved dismissively. "Nah, it's local knowledge. Trust me, it's worth it." Only adds about 30 minutes to your hike, and you'll have the place all to yourselves." Mike, always eager for adventure, was already nodding. "Sounds cool. What do you guys think?" I wish I'd spoken up then. I wish I'd said no. But I didn't want to seem paranoid or ruin everyone's trip over what might have been nothing but my overactive imagination. So we thanked the man, and he continued on his way, heading back toward the parking lot. We discussed it briefly among ourselves. Alex was hesitant, but Mike was enthusiastic, and Sarah was on the fence. Eventually, we decided to check out this supposedly secret waterfall. When we reached the unmarked trail, it looked innocent enough. Narrower than the main path, but still visible. We turned onto it, Alex leading the way, consulting his GPS occasionally to make sure we could find our way back. The first 15 minutes were fine. The trail was a bit overgrown but passable. Then it started getting steeper and less defined. We had to push through bushes and climb over fallen trees. I started to sweat, not just from exertion. "How much farther do you think?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with the same uncertainty I was feeling. "The guy said about 30 minutes, Mike replied. "We should be getting close." That's when we saw it. A small cairn, those stacked rock piles, right in the middle of the path. It looked freshly made, the stones clean and deliberately placed. "That's weird," Alex said, stopping to examine it. "Why would someone build this here?" "Maybe to mark the way to the falls," Mike suggested. But something about it felt wrong. The stones were too perfectly balanced, too intentionally placed. And who had built it? The trail didn't look like it got much traffic. "I don't like this," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe we should head back." I nodded immediately, relief washing over me at her suggestion. "Yeah, let's just stick to the original plan." Even Mike seemed less enthusiastic now. "All right, let's turn around." We'd only gone about 100 yards back the way we came when Alex stopped so suddenly that I almost bumped into him. "What the hell?" he whispered. There, in the middle of the path, was another cairn, identical to the first one. "That wasn't there before," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "I swear that wasn't there when we came through." "Maybe we took a wrong turn," Mike suggested, but his voice had lost its confidence. Alex shook his head. "No, this is the same path. Look, there's that fallen log we climbed over." He pointed to a massive tree trunk lying across the trail about 20 feet ahead. We all stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone else was on the trail, but we hadn't passed anyone. "Let's just get back to the main trail," Sarah said, her voice tight with tension. "Now." We picked up our pace, almost jogging down the narrow path. The forest seemed different now, darker, more oppressive. The birdsong had stopped. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. That's when we heard it. The sound of branches snapping, coming from somewhere to our right, parallel to the trail. Then from our left, someone, or multiple someones, moving through the underbrush. "Hello?" Alex called out, his voice steady despite the fear I could see in his eyes. "Is someone there?" No response, just more rustling, closer now. We reached a small clearing, and suddenly he was there. The same man who'd suggested the trail. Only now he wasn't alone. 2 other men stood slightly behind him, both holding machetes. Not the small kind you might use for clearing brush. These were large, heavy blades that gleamed dully in the filtered forest light. The first man's friendly demeanor was gone. His face was hard, his eyes cold and calculating. "Seems like you folks got a bit lost," he said, his voice completely different from before, lower, threatening. "Why don't you set those packs down? Make yourselves comfortable." My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind was racing through all the horrible possibilities of what these men might do to us out here where no one could hear us scream. Alex shifted slightly, positioning himself between the men and Sarah. "We were just heading back to the main trail," he said evenly. "No need for any trouble." "No trouble at all," the man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just drop your packs, nice and slow." I glanced at my friends' faces. Mike was pale, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah was trembling slightly, her hand gripping the strap of her pack so tightly her knuckles were white. One of the men with machetes took a step forward, and that's when Alex whispered, "Run!" It was like a starting gun went off. We all bolted in different directions, crashing through the underbrush. I heard shouting behind us, the heavy footfalls of pursuit. A branch whipped across my face, drawing blood, but I barely felt it. Pure adrenaline drove me forward. I have no idea how long we ran. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Somehow, miraculously, we all ended up back on the main trail. Alex had grabbed Sarah's hand when we started running, so they were together. Mike and I had taken similar paths and found each other quickly. We didn't stop running until we reached the parking lot. Our car was still there, thankfully, but there was also an old pickup truck parked nearby that hadn't been there before. Rusted, mud-spattered, with no license plates. We piled into our car, Alex fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them into the ignition. As we peeled out of the lot, I looked back and saw figures emerging from the tree line at the far end of the parking area. We drove straight to the nearest ranger station and reported what happened. The rangers took our statements and said they'd investigate, but they seemed skeptical. They suggested the men might have been illegal marijuana growers protecting their crop, which apparently is common in some remote areas of national forests. We filed a police report too, but we never heard anything back. No arrests, no follow-up, nothing. It's been 8 months now, and I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, imagining what might have happened if we hadn't gotten away. I can't stop thinking about those cairns that appeared out of nowhere, marking our path, or how easily we were lured off the main trail by a friendly face and the promise of something special. I don't know who those men were or what they wanted. Maybe they just planned to rob us, maybe something worse. But I do know this: I'll never trust a stranger in the woods again, and I'll never ever leave a marked trail for an unmarked one, no matter how tempting the destination sounds. The scariest part isn't what happened. It's thinking about all the other hikers who might have taken that same advice, followed that same unmarked path, and weren't fast enough to get away. Story 5. I've never shared this before, but I need to get it off my chest. The house we've lived in for over 20 years has always felt like home to us, despite its quirks and creaky floors. My husband Tom and I bought it when I was pregnant with Ethan, our first son. We fell in love with the Victorian charm, the bay, windows, and the spacious backyard, perfect for raising children in Willow Creek. When Ethan was around 8, he started sleepwalking. Nothing prepared me for how unsettling it would be to wake up in the middle of the night and find your child standing there, eyes wide open but completely vacant. I'm a light sleeper, always have been, so I'd usually hear his little feet padding down the hallway before he'd appear in our doorway. The first few times it happened, I nearly had a heart attack. There's something deeply disturbing about seeing your child awake but not present. His eyes would be open, but he wasn't seeing me. Sometimes he'd mumble things I couldn't understand, garbled words that made no sense. I did what any mom would do. I researched sleepwalking. The pediatrician assured me it was normal, especially for children his age. "Just guide him back to bed gently," she said. "Don't startle him awake." So that's what I did. I'd take his hand and walk him back to his room, tuck him in, and he'd usually stay put for the rest of the night. In the morning, Ethan never remembered any of it. I'd ask, "Do you remember getting up last night?" And he'd look at me like I was making it up. The sleepwalking became routine, happening 2 or 3 times a week. We adjusted, though I never fully got used to it. Then one night, about 6 months after it started, something changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a sound I couldn't immediately identify, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't the pipes or the radiator. It was too consistent, too deliberate. I got out of bed, careful not to wake Tom, and followed the sound down the hallway. What I saw still gives me goosebumps. Ethan was standing in the hallway facing the wall, about halfway between our bedroom and his. He was tapping his forehead against the wall, not hard enough to hurt himself, but in a slow, measured way that seemed almost purposeful. His fingertips were grazing the wallpaper, like he was trying to feel his way through it. "Ethan," I whispered, not wanting to startle him. He didn't respond, just kept tapping. Tap, tap, tap. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. I gently took his shoulders and guided him back to bed. He went without resistance, his body limp and cooperative. The next night, it happened again. Same spot in the hallway, same tapping motion. I started to worry. Was this normal sleepwalking behavior? Was he trying to tell me something? Was he in pain? The pediatrician reassured me that sleepwalkers often do repetitive movements, and as long as he wasn't hurting himself, I shouldn't worry too much. This pattern continued for months. He'd get up, wander to that specific spot in the hallway, and tap his forehead against the wall. Sometimes he'd mumble, words I could never quite catch. I started keeping a journal, noting the times, the behaviors, trying to find some pattern or explanation. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sleepwalking stopped. Just before his 10th birthday, Ethan slept through the night, and then the next night, and the night after that. After a month without incident, I finally relaxed. Our pediatrician had been right, he'd simply outgrown it. Life moved on. We had another son, Noah, 3 years after the sleepwalking stopped. Our house filled with the chaos and joy of raising 2 boys. Ethan grew into a teenager with no memory of his sleepwalking years, and I eventually stopped thinking about those strange nights, until Noah turned 8. It started the same way. I woke up to the sound of small feet in the hallway. There was Noah, standing in our doorway, eyes open but unseeing. My stomach dropped. Not again. I guided him back to bed, hoping it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. Noah began sleepwalking regularly, just as his brother had. I told myself it must be genetic, that sleepwalking runs in families. But something felt different this time. I had a sense of dread I couldn't shake. Then came the night I woke to that familiar tapping sound. I knew before I even got out of bed what I would find. Noah was in the hallway, in the exact same spot where Ethan used to stand, tapping his forehead against the wall in the same slow, rhythmic pattern. His fingertips grazed the wallpaper in the exact same way. I felt like I was watching a replay of Ethan's sleepwalking, down to the smallest detail. The way Noah shifted his weight from foot to foot while standing there, the angle of his head against the wall, the precise spot on the wall. I'd know it anywhere after all those nights watching Ethan. What terrified me most was that Noah had no way of knowing about Ethan's sleepwalking. It had stopped years before Noah was born, and we'd never discussed it in front of him. Ethan didn't remember it himself, so he couldn't have told his brother. There was no way Noah could be mimicking behavior he'd never witnessed. I woke Tom that night. "You need to see this," I whispered, pulling him into the hallway. We watched Noah for a few minutes before guiding him back to bed. Tom was disturbed but tried to rationalize it. Kids sleepwalk, Beck. It's probably just coincidence. But I knew better. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else, something I couldn't explain. Like Ethan, Noah eventually outgrew the sleepwalking. By his 10th birthday, the nightly wandering had stopped. Life returned to normal, though I never forgot how identical their behaviors had been. It became one of those family mysteries we couldn't solve but learned to live with. Almost 15 years passed. Ethan moved out for college, and Noah was in his final year of high school. Tom and I decided it was time to renovate the house, update the bathrooms, replace the kitchen cabinets, and refresh the dated wallpaper in the hallway. It was a Saturday in October when we started stripping the wallpaper. Tom and I worked side by side, scoring the paper and spraying it with water to loosen the adhesive. We'd been at it for hours when we reached that spot, the exact location where both boys had stood during their sleepwalking episodes. The wallpaper came away differently there. It was thicker, layered. As we peeled it back, I noticed something reflective underneath. My heart started racing as we uncovered more of it. "Tom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "there's something here." We carefully removed the remaining wallpaper to reveal an antique mirror embedded in the wall. It was about 12 inches square with an ornate silver frame, tarnished with age. It had been deliberately covered up with multiple layers of wallpaper hidden from view. I felt dizzy as the realization hit me. This mirror was positioned exactly where both boys had been tapping their foreheads while sleepwalking. The exact spot. They had somehow been drawn to this hidden object that was impossible to see or know about. "How is this possible?" Tom asked, his face pale. "How could they have known?" I had no answer. We stood there staring at the mirror, trying to make sense of it. The glass was cloudy with age, but still reflective. Looking into it gave me a cold, uneasy feeling I can't quite describe. We decided to remove it immediately. Tom carefully pried it from the wall, revealing a small rectangular niche that had been built specifically to house the mirror. As he lifted it out, I noticed something etched into the back of the frame, a date, 1897, the year our house was built. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my boys, both drawn to that hidden mirror while sleepwalking. How had they known it was there? What had compelled them to tap on that exact spot? And why the identical behavior, years apart? I started researching the history of our house, digging through town records and old newspapers. I discovered that the original owners had lost 2 children, both boys, to illness in the early 1900s. The articles didn't specify what illness, just that they died within years of each other. We put the mirror in the attic, wrapped in an old blanket. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I didn't want it in our living space either. Sometimes I still wake up at night, thinking I hear that tapping sound, though both my boys are grown now and no longer live at home. I've never found an explanation that makes sense. How did both my sleepwalking sons know about something hidden behind layers of wallpaper? Something that had been concealed for decades before they were born? Something that should have been completely unknown to them? I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena, at least I didn't before. But I can't find any rational explanation for what happened in our house. All I know is that my boys were drawn to something they couldn't possibly have known about, and the coincidence is too perfect to be just that, a coincidence. We've since repaired the wall, patched it up so you'd never know there was a mirror there. But I know, and sometimes, passing that spot in the hallway, I still feel a chill, like something is watching me from behind the wall. Story 6. I still get chills walking to my car after work. It's been 6 months since everything happened, but I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe again. I wanted to share my experience because I need others to understand how these people operate. They're methodical, they're patient, and they're everywhere. I was working at this little roadside bar called Murphy's, about 20 minutes outside of town. It's one of those places that looks like it's been there forever. Wood paneling, neon beer signs, jukebox that still takes quarters. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills while I finished my associate's degree. Most nights we'd get a mix of locals who'd been coming there for decades and truckers passing through on Route 16. Sunday through Thursday, I usually worked alone from 6 p.m. till 2 a.m. My boss, Mike, would leave around 10 once the dinner rush died down. The bar would be pretty much dead after midnight, especially on weeknights, but we stayed open for the occasional trucker or insomniac. This particular Sunday night about 6 months ago was dead even by Sunday standards. It had been raining all day, and by 1 in the morning, I was just wiping down tables and restocking for the next day. I remember checking my phone, seeing it was 1:07, and thinking I might close up a little early since nobody had come in for almost an hour. That's when he walked in. He looked so out of place I actually stopped what I was doing and stared for a second. Most of our customers wore flannel, work boots, or trucker caps. This guy was wearing a black turtleneck under a tailored black jacket with perfectly pressed slacks. His shoes, I specifically remember his shoes, were these shiny leather loafers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had this silver watch that caught the light when he moved his wrist. "Quiet night," he said, sliding onto a bar stool. His voice was deep, confident. He had this accent I couldn't quite place, not foreign, just refined. "Yeah, Sundays usually are," I replied, setting down a napkin in front of him. "What can I get you?" He scanned our modest selection of bottles behind me. "Do you have any Macallan?" We did have exactly one bottle of Macallan 18 that had been sitting untouched on the top shelf for years. Mike kept it for show more than anything. Nobody who came to Murphy's was spending $30 on a single pour of scotch. "Neat, please," he said when I reached for it. While I poured his drink, I could feel him watching me. Not in the usual way some customers do when they're being creepy. It was more evaluating, calculating. He asked my name, and without thinking I told him, "Cadence." I still regret giving him my real name. "Beautiful name," he said, taking a sip of his scotch. "Do you work here often, Cadence?" I gave my standard vague answer about my schedule varying week to week. Something about him made me not want to share details. He nursed that one drink for nearly 40 minutes, asking seemingly innocent questions the whole time. Where did I go to school? Did I live nearby? Did I usually close up alone? Each question felt like he was building a profile on me. Just before 2, as I was giving him his check, he finally asked the question that sent goosebumps down my arms. "What time do you usually get off work?" I lied and told him my boyfriend was picking me up in 10 minutes. There was no boyfriend, but the lie came automatically. He just smiled, left cash on the counter including a $100 tip, and walked out. I watched through the windows as he got into a black Mercedes and drove away. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was just some rich guy passing through who was being friendly, right? But something felt off. A week passed, and I'd almost forgotten about him when they both showed up. It was the following Sunday, again around 1 a.m. The same man, but this time with a woman. She was maybe in her mid-30s. wearing this red cocktail dress that looked wildly out of place in our dingy bar. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore these massive diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. Cadence, the man said my name like we were old friends. I told my associate about this charming little place and the lovely bartender. This is Elise. The woman's smile never reached her eyes. That's what I remember most about her. She was smiling constantly, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She extended her hand across the bar, her nails perfectly manicured in deep red. "It's so wonderful to meet you," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Richard has told me all about you." Richard, so that was his name, or at least the name he was using. They ordered drinks, expensive ones again, and this time it was mostly Elise talking. But the questions were different, more direct, more personal. "Do you have family in the area?" she asked. "Do you live alone or with roommates? What are you studying in school?" With each question, my uneasiness grew. Between questions, she kept complimenting me, my hair, my smile, how I carried myself. "You have such a presence," she said, "such poise." Then she dropped it. "I run an exclusive club just outside the city. Very high-end clientele, very discreet. We're always looking for smart, beautiful women like you to work private events. The pay is exceptional, usually about $2,000 for a weekend night." $2,000 for one night? Even in my discomfort, I couldn't help but do the math. That was more than I made in 2 weeks at the bar. "What kind of club?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, it's for professionals, executives, politicians, people who value privacy and exceptional service," she said vaguely. "You'd primarily be serving drinks, making conversation. Sometimes our clients like to have beautiful women accompany them to events. All very respectable, of course." Every alarm bell in my head was going off. I'd heard enough stories, read enough news articles. This wasn't a job offer. This was a recruitment. "I actually have someone waiting outside who could explain everything much better," Elise said, checking her watch. "He handles all our staffing. Would you mind stepping out with me for just a moment when you have a break? His car is right outside." My blood ran cold. "I can't leave the bar unattended," I said firmly, "and I'm not looking for another job right now." Something flashed across her face. Irritation? Anger? But the smile never faltered. "Well, take my card at least. The offer stands." She slid a plain white business card across the counter. It had only a phone number, no name, no business name. I took it just to end the conversation. They left shortly after when a group of regulars came in. As they walked out, I saw Elise lean close to Richard and whisper something. He glanced back at me before they disappeared into the parking lot. I threw the card away as soon as they left and told Mike about it the next day. He brushed it off as rich people being weird, but agreed it was creepy. I thought that would be the end of it. 3 days later, I was closing up alone again. It was a Thursday, almost 2 a.m. As I walked to my car in the back lot, I noticed headlights turn on in the far corner of the parking lot. I didn't recognize the car, a dark sedan with tinted windows. I got in my car quickly, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot. In my rear-view mirror, I saw the sedan follow. When I turned onto the main road, it turned too. When I switched lanes, it switched lanes. Instead of driving home, I headed straight for the police station about 10 minutes away. The car followed for about half the distance, then abruptly turned down a side street when it became clear where I was going. The officer I spoke to took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do since nothing actually happened. "Be aware of your surroundings," he advised. "Maybe have someone walk you to your car after work." I didn't see the sedan again, and I started to think maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a coincidence. Then she came back. It was the following Tuesday. I was alone again, and it was 1:30 a.m. Mike had texted saying he was stopping by to drop off some paperwork before I closed. The door chimed, and I looked up expecting to see him. It was Elise, alone this time. "Just one glass of Pinot Noir," she said, sitting at the bar. Her smile was still there, still not reaching her eyes. "Closing soon, right? Don't worry, I won't keep you late." My hands were shaking as I poured her wine. I texted Mike under the bar, "Please hurry." "Did you consider my offer?" she asked, taking a small sip. "I'm really not interested," I said firmly. "That's a shame. You'd be perfect for our clientele. Very memorable." The way she said memorable made my skin crawl. I busied myself wiping down the counter, checking my phone every few seconds for a response from Mike. Then I heard it, the front door opening again. I looked up, relieved, expecting to see Mike. There was no one there. But through the window, I could see a black van had pulled up directly in front of the entrance. At the same moment, I heard a rattling from the back door, the one that led to the employee parking lot. Someone was trying to force it open. Elise was watching me, still smiling, as she slowly stood up. "Our clients really had their hearts set on meeting you, Cadence." I grabbed my phone and ran into the storage room, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. As the operator answered, I heard the back door burst open. "Murphy's Bar on Route 16, I whispered desperately. "They're trying to take me. Please hurry." I could hear footsteps in the bar now, multiple sets. They were talking to each other in low voices. Then Elise's voice, clear and commanding. "Check the storage room." The handle of the storage room door jiggled. Then came the pounding. "Open the door, Cadence. Don't make this difficult." I was crying silently, pressed against the wall behind a shelf of liquor boxes. The 911 operator was saying something, but I couldn't hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Then came the sound of screeching tires from the parking lot, a car door slamming, and Mike's voice bellowing, "What the hell is going on here?" There was a moment of confusion, voices arguing, and then the sound of retreating footsteps. A car engine started, then another. When Mike finally found me in the storage room, I was huddled on the floor, still clutching my phone. "They're gone," he said, helping me up. "I called the cops. They're on their way." The police arrived minutes later. They took statements, reviewed our security camera footage. The footage showed everything. Elise at the bar, the black van pulling up, and 3 masked figures. 2 coming through the back and 1 through the front. They had been waiting to trap me from both sides. The police said it was almost certainly a trafficking operation. They targeted me specifically, planned it for weeks, waited until I was alone. They knew my schedule, my routine. They'd been watching me. Despite all the evidence, they never caught them. The license plates on both vehicles were stolen. Elise's fingerprints weren't in any database. The phone number on the card was a burner that had already been disconnected. I don't work alone at night anymore. Mike made sure of that. I'm finishing my degree this semester and moving to another state as soon as I graduate. I've changed my hair, my car, even my name on social media. But sometimes, when I'm driving home at night, I still check my rearview mirror for headlights following me. I still double-check the locks on my apartment door. And I still wonder how many other Cadences are out there. Women who got into cars with people like Elise and Richard, lured by promises of easy money and exclusive opportunities, who weren't lucky enough to have someone show up just in time. They're still out there, and they're still watching. Story 7. I still check the windows constantly. I still sleep with a baseball bat next to my bed. I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there, waiting. It's been 3 months since it happened, but the fear hasn't subsided one bit. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I live in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where nothing ever happens. You know the type, rows of similar houses, lots of trees, families with kids riding bikes, the whole Norman Rockwell scene. I've always felt safe here. Well, I used to anyway. That Thursday started like any other day. I went to work. I do IT support for a local company. Had the usual meetings, fixed the usual computer problems. Nothing special. I was looking forward to getting home, ordering a pizza, and binge watching that new show everyone was talking about. Just a normal, boring evening at home. I got back to my place around 6:30, changed into sweats, and was just about to open the food delivery app when my phone rang. It was my buddy Mike. "Hey man, I'm really sorry to bother you, but my car won't start. I'm stuck at the gym and need a ride home. I'd call an Uber, but I left my wallet at home like an idiot." I sighed. So much for my quiet evening. But Mike's a good friend. He'd do the same for me. "Yeah, no problem. I'll head out now. Give me like 20 minutes. After hanging up, I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, put my shoes back on, and opened the front door. That's when I saw him. There was a man sitting on my porch steps, literally inches from my door. I nearly tripped over him as I stepped out. He was just sitting there, silently, waiting. He was wearing this heavy dark coat even though it wasn't that cold out, maybe 35 degrees. The weird part was the black scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face, covering everything below his eyes. His eyes. I still remember them. Pale blue, almost gray. They didn't look right somehow. We both just froze for a second. I was completely caught off guard, and my heart immediately started pounding. I mean, who the hell sits on someone's porch without knocking? After what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, he stood up. He was taller than me by a few inches, probably 6'2" or 3. "Sorry," he said, his voice muffled behind the scarf. "Didn't mean to frighten you." I just stood there, keys in hand, trying to figure out what to say. My mind was racing through possibilities. Was he a delivery person? A neighbor I hadn't met? Someone lost? "Are you David?" he asked. Then he paused. "Or maybe Daryl?" That sent a chill down my spine. My name isn't David or Daryl, not even close. And the way he said it, like he wasn't really sure who he was looking for, felt off. "No, wrong house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nobody by that name lives here." He just nodded slowly, looking at me for a beat too long. Then without another word, he turned and walked down my driveway toward the street. I stood in my doorway watching him go, wondering if I should call someone. But what would I even say? Some guy sat on my porch and asked for someone who doesn't live here. Not exactly emergency material. I waited until he disappeared down the street before I got in my car. I kept checking my mirrors the whole way to the gym, half expecting to see him following me, but there was nothing unusual. I picked up Mike, and he suggested grabbing dinner at Culver's since we were both hungry. We sat in the restaurant for about an hour, and honestly, I almost forgot about the weird encounter. Mike was going on about his girlfriend problems, and I was distracted enough that the porch guy slipped to the back of my mind. I dropped Mike off around 8:30 and got back home just before 9. The house was exactly as I'd left it. I locked the door behind me, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and settled in to watch TV. I watched a couple episodes of that show I'd been meaning to see, but it wasn't as good as people had made it out to be. Around 11, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, did a quick check of the doors to make sure they were locked, and headed toward my bedroom. That's when the encounter from earlier suddenly popped back into my head. I don't know why, but something about it was nagging at me. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. Why was he sitting there so close to my door? Why was he wearing that scarf over his face? And why did he ask for David or Daryl like he wasn't sure which name he was supposed to say? Just to ease my mind, I decided to look out my front window to check the porch. It had started snowing lightly while I was watching TV, and there was a thin layer of white covering everything. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. They weren't my footprints from earlier. These came from the street, up my driveway, around to where my car was parked, and then into my backyard. They disappeared where the trees blocked my view. My stomach dropped. Someone had been walking around my property while I was inside watching TV. I quickly checked all the locks again and then peered out every window I could, trying to see if anyone was still out there. The backyard was dark, with only the dim light from my kitchen window illuminating part of it. The rest was hidden in shadows. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I had to redial after messing up the first time. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered. I think there's someone outside my house, I said, trying to keep my voice down. There are footprints in the snow going around my property and into my backyard. Earlier tonight, there was a strange man on my porch asking for someone who doesn't live here. The operator asked for my address and told me they'd send an officer to check it out. She stayed on the line with me, asking if I was alone and if all my doors and windows were locked. Yes, I'm alone and everything's locked as far as I know, I told her, moving from window to window, scanning the darkness outside. That's when I heard it, a loud bang from the back of the house. There's someone at my back door, I whispered into the phone, my heart nearly exploding in my chest. The banging came again, harder this time. I crept toward the hallway that led to my back door, staying close to the wall. I could see the door from where I stood. It had a small window in the upper half, but the blinds were drawn. As I watched, a shadow moved behind the blinds. Someone was definitely out there. I can see someone at my back door, I whispered to the operator. They're trying to get in. Officers are on their way, she assured me. Stay on the line. Is there somewhere safe you can go until they arrive? Before I could answer, there was an even louder bang, different from the others. This one sounded like something hitting the door with force. Not a fist, something harder. Then I saw the doorknob move, turning back and forth violently. They're trying to open my door, I said, panic rising in my voice. I think they have a weapon or something. They're hitting the door hard. The next bang was followed by a cracking sound, wood splintering. Get out of the house if you can safely do so, the operator said firmly. Do you have a car? Yes, I replied, already moving toward the front door, my eyes still fixed on the back door as it shook with another impact. If you can get to your car safely, do it now. Lock yourself in and drive away from the house. Stay on the line with me. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my keys from the hook, unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, and slipped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I realized I didn't have a coat, just my sweatpants and t-shirt. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys. I could hear more banging from the back of the house. As I finally got the door open and jumped inside, I looked back at the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see a shadow moving. He was inside. I started the car and peeled out of the driveway, not caring about the noise anymore. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement at my front door, just a dark shape in the doorway. before I turned the corner and lost sight of my house. I drove to the entrance of my neighborhood and waited there for the police, still on the phone with the 911 operator. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept checking the mirrors, terrified that somehow he had followed me. The police arrived about 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing. I explained what had happened, and they went to check out my house while I waited in one of the patrol cars with an officer. When they came back, what they told me made my blood run cold. My back door had been forced open. The frame was splintered where the lock had been broken. There were fresh footprints throughout my house, including in my bedroom. But whoever had broken in was gone. I gave them a description of the man I'd seen on my porch earlier, but I couldn't tell them much. Just his height, the dark coat, the scarf covering his face, and those weird, pale eyes. I had no way of knowing if it was the same person who broke in later, but it seemed like too much of a coincidence. The police took my statement and searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. They told me the standard things: file a report, stay with a friend for a few days, call if I noticed anything else suspicious. But I could tell they didn't have much to go on. I stayed at Mike's place for a week after that. When I finally went back home, I installed a security system, new deadbolts, motion sensor lights, the works. But none of it makes me feel safe. The worst part is not knowing who he was, not knowing what he wanted, not knowing if he was looking for someone named David or Daryl, or if that was just a cover when I caught him sitting there, not knowing if he'll come back. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that call from Mike. Would I have stayed home all evening? Would the man have tried to break in while I was there? Or was he watching the house, waiting for me to leave so he could get inside? I still live in the same house, but I'm looking to move as soon as my lease is up. I can't sleep through the night anymore. Every noise makes me jump. I keep seeing those footprints in the snow leading right into my yard, right into my life. And sometimes, when I'm driving home from work and it's getting dark, I find myself scanning the porches of houses as I pass, looking for a tall figure in a dark coat, sitting and waiting for someone to open their door. Story 8. I still can't explain what happened to us in El Yunque. This was 5 years ago during spring break of my junior year at UPR, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Maria and I had been dating for almost 2 years at that point. She was this fiery, adventurous Puerto Rican girl who was always pushing me out of my comfort zone. I was more cautious, the type to read warning signs and actually follow them. We'd been planning this day hike through El Yunque National Forest for weeks. Maria grew up on the island, but had only been to the rainforest a couple times with family, and I'd never been, despite studying in Puerto Rico for almost 3 years. The weather was perfect that day, warm but not too humid, with these amazing fluffy clouds overhead. We packed light, just water, some snacks, a small bottle of Bacardi, Maria's idea, our phones, and a cheap digital camera. When we got to the visitor center around 10 in the morning, we found out the trail we'd planned to hike, La Mina, was closed for maintenance. Something about a landslide making it dangerous. There were signs and these orange plastic barriers blocking the trailhead. I remember being disappointed but ready to try one of the other trails the ranger suggested. Maria had other ideas. Come on, Michael. Everyone's going to be on those other trails now. La Mina will be completely empty. We'll have the whole place to ourselves, she whispered as we walked away from the information desk. I immediately said no. I'm not usually a rule breaker, especially when it comes to safety stuff. But Maria kept pushing, saying the rangers were probably just being overly cautious, that it would be an adventure, that we'd have the trail all to ourselves. She had this way of looking at me that always wore me down. "If it looks dangerous at all, we turn back immediately," I finally said, and her face lit up with that smile that always made my heart skip. We waited until the rangers were busy with other visitors, then slipped past the barriers when nobody was looking. The guilt hit me right away, but the excitement of doing something forbidden together was honestly a bit of a rush too. The first part of the trail was gorgeous. The forest was so dense and green it was almost overwhelming. The canopy overhead filtered the sunlight into these dappled patterns on the ground. There were these massive ferns and vines hanging everywhere, and you could hear the constant background noise of water running and birds calling. We hadn't seen a single other person since entering the trail. After hiking for maybe 45 minutes, we found this perfect little spot next to the trail, where a fallen tree created a natural bench overlooking a small cascade. We sat down, shared a few swigs of rum from our water bottles, and just took in the scenery. Maria was taking pictures and laughing, pointing out colorful birds I'd never have noticed on my own. It was honestly one of the most peaceful moments of my life. Then everything changed in an instant. Maria had gotten up to take a picture of some flower when she let out this scream that made my blood freeze. It wasn't a startled yelp or a shriek of surprise. It was pure terror. I jumped up and ran to her, thinking she'd seen a snake or maybe slipped near the edge of the trail. Instead, she was standing rigid, pointing at something on the ground. There, right in the middle of the trail, was a mongoose, decapitated. The head was completely separated from the body, maybe a foot away. The cut was clean, like it had been done with a knife. There was blood around it, but not as much as you'd expect, like it had happened recently, but not right before we found it. "What the fuck?" I whispered, pulling Maria back a few steps. "What the fuck is this?" Maria was shaking. "Someone did this," she said. "Someone just did this." The realization that this wasn't a natural predator kill hit me hard. The cut was too clean. And mongooses aren't native to the rainforest. They were introduced to the island to control rats in sugarcane fields. Someone had brought this animal here, killed it, and left it displayed on the trail. I remember looking around frantically, suddenly aware of how isolated we were. The forest that had seemed so peaceful now felt oppressive and watching. Every rustle in the vegetation made me tense up. "We should go back," Maria whispered, still staring at the dead animal. Part of me absolutely agreed, but another part thought that if we turned around now, we'd have to pass this spot again on the way back. At least if we continued forward, we could take a different trail back to the visitor center. "Let's keep going," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "We'll put some distance between us and this. Then we can cut over to one of the other trails and loop back to the parking lot." Maria hesitated but nodded. I took her hand and we stepped carefully around the mongoose, both of us looking away. The mood had completely changed. We weren't talking anymore, just moving quickly and quietly, listening for any sound that seemed out of place. The trail started to feel different too. Maybe it was just our nerves, but the forest seemed darker, the sounds more ominous. What had been beautiful bird calls now sounded like warnings. The humidity felt suffocating. After another 20 minutes of tense hiking, Maria stopped suddenly. "I don't feel good, Michael," she said quietly. Her face was pale and she was still trembling slightly. "I want to go back." "But if we go back..." "I know, but I need to get out of here. Something doesn't feel right." She was right. Nothing about this felt right anymore. I nodded and we turned around, heading back the way we came. I tried to distract her with small talk as we walked, but neither of us could focus on conversation. We were both listening, watching the trees, jumping at every sound. As we approached the area where we'd found the mongoose, I squeezed Maria's hand. "Just keep your head down and walk past quickly," I told her. "Don't look at it." We rounded the bend in the trail where the mongoose had been, both of us tensed and ready to hurry past. But the mongoose wasn't there anymore. The blood was still visible, a dark stain on the dirt, but the animal was gone. Both body and head had vanished. "Where is it?" Maria whispered, her nails digging into my palm. "Michael, where did it go?" I shook my head, scanning the ground around us. That's when Maria gasped and pointed up. Hanging from a branch about 7 feet off the ground was the mongoose. Someone had strung it up with what looked like thin twine, tying its paws together so it dangled like some sick ornament. The head had been reattached, but poorly, slightly askew and dripping with some kind of thick, greenish liquid. The worst part was that it was slowly rotating in the light breeze, as if whoever had done this wanted to make sure we could see it from every angle. Maria screamed. Not a short scream, but a sustained sound of pure horror that seemed to echo through the trees. I clamped my hand over her mouth, suddenly terrified that whoever had done this might hear us. "We need to run," I whispered in her ear. "Right now." I grabbed her wrist and we started moving, first at a fast walk and then breaking into a full sprint. The trail was uneven and slippery in places, but fear kept us going. My lungs were burning and Maria was sobbing as she ran, but we didn't slow down. We'd been running for maybe 5 minutes when we heard it, a scream from somewhere behind us on the trail. Not an animal sound, but unmistakably human. A woman's scream, high-pitched and terrified, the kind of sound someone makes when they're being attacked. We froze for a split second, looking at each other in horror. Then I pulled Maria forward again. "Don't stop," I gasped. "Just keep moving." By the time we reached the barrier at the trailhead, we were completely exhausted. We stumbled past the orange plastic barriers and collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. A park worker spotted us immediately and came storming over, furious that we'd ignored the closure signs. "There's someone back there," I managed to say between breaths. We heard screaming, and there was a dead animal. Someone killed it and hung it up. The worker's anger turned to concern. He radioed someone while I explained what had happened. Maria just sat silently beside me, staring at nothing, still trembling. They took us to a ranger station where we gave statements. I remember the rangers exchanging these looks when we described the mongoose, like they'd heard something similar before. They called the police, who asked us the same questions all over again. Did we see anyone else on the trail? Had we noticed any vehicles in the parking lot that seemed suspicious? Did we touch anything? Maria barely spoke throughout the whole process. She just kept shaking her head when they asked her questions directly. I don't know if she was in shock or just too scared to relive it by talking about it. They never told us what they found when they sent people to investigate. Maybe they thought we were just drunk college kids making up stories, even though we were clearly terrified. Maybe they didn't want to cause panic among tourists. Or maybe they found something worse than what we saw and decided to keep it quiet. Maria and I broke up that summer. She never wanted to talk about what happened, and whenever I brought it up, she'd shut down completely. The experience changed something in her, or maybe between us. I don't know. I've been back to Puerto Rico since then, but I've never returned to El Yunque. I still think about that day all the time. About the mongoose with its head placed back on wrong, about the green, liquid. But mostly I think about that scream we heard on the trail, a human scream from someone we never saw. I don't know if they found whoever made that sound. I don't know if they caught whoever was doing those things to animals in the forest. I don't know if it's still happening. All I know is that sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I can hear that scream echoing in my bedroom. And I wonder who it was, and if anyone ever found them, or if they're still there somewhere in the trees, watching and waiting for the next hikers who decide to ignore the warning signs. Story 9. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. Even now, typing this out, my hands are shaking a bit. But after all these years, I think I need to share what happened. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. When my husband Mark got transferred to Pinewood, I wasn't thrilled about moving. We'd been happy in our old neighborhood, and George, my 9-year-old son, had good friends there. But Mark's new position came with better pay and benefits, and honestly, we needed that after the divorce. Yes, I said husband, and then divorce. Mark and I separated just 2 months after the move. He stayed in the city for work, while George and I remained in the house we'd just bought. George had always been good at making friends, sometimes too good. He had this habit of collecting the odd kids, the ones who didn't quite fit in. I used to joke that he ran a little island of misfit toys, so when he started at Pinewood Elementary, I wasn't surprised when he came home talking about this boy Sebastian, who sat alone at lunch. "He's really smart, Mom," George told me while munching on his after-school snack. "He knows all about stars and planets and stuff." I was just happy he was adjusting. The first few weeks after Mark left had been rough on both of us. George had gone, quiet for a while, barely speaking during dinner. So this new friendship seemed like a positive sign. About a month into the school year, I got a call from the principal, Mrs. Harmon. My stomach dropped as soon as I saw the school's number on my phone. She asked me to come in for a meeting about an incident involving George. When I pressed for details, she just said it would be better to discuss in person. I remember sitting in that tiny chair in her office, feeling like I was the one in trouble. Mrs. Harmon explained that George had apparently hit another student, Sebastian, with an eraser during math class. The teacher had seen George with the eraser in his hand and Sebastian crying with a red mark on his cheek. "This isn't like George," I said immediately. "He's never been aggressive." Mrs. Harmon nodded sympathetically. "I understand, but we have a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations. George will need to serve detention tomorrow." On the drive home, George sat silently in the back seat, picking at a loose thread on his backpack. "Want to tell me what happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Sebastian lied," he said quietly. "He told me to play this game where we pass the eraser under the desk. Then when I did it, he grabbed it and hit himself with it and told the teacher I did it." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Why would he do that?" George shrugged. He said it would be funny. That night, I couldn't sleep. It bothered me that this kid had manipulated my son, but I also didn't want to be that mom who believes her child can do no wrong. I decided to call Sebastian's mother the next day. It took some digging to find her number. She wasn't in the school directory yet. Eventually, I got it from another mom whose daughter was in George's class. When I called, a woman answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, almost timid. "Hi, is this Maggie? Sebastian's mom? This is Olivia Richardson, George's mother." There was a pause. "Yes, this is Maggie. Is everything okay?" I explained about the incident, trying to be diplomatic. "I'm not saying George didn't do it, but he says Sebastian tricked him into a game and then blamed him." To my surprise, Maggie sighed heavily. "I'm so sorry. Sebastian he sometimes does things like this. He's a good boy, really, but he has difficulty with making friends appropriately." Her candor caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, not this immediate acceptance of blame. Maybe the boys just got off on the wrong foot, I suggested. George actually really liked Sebastian before this happened. Oh, that's wonderful to hear, Maggie said, her voice brightening. Sebastian talks about George all the time. He doesn't usually connect with other children so easily. We chatted for a bit longer, and Maggie suggested having George over for a sleepover that weekend. It might help them work through this misunderstanding, she said. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. George was excited about the sleepover, seemingly having forgotten the eraser incident already. Saturday evening, I drove George to Sebastian's house. It was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modest two-story with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs. Not at all what I'd expected in our otherwise well-maintained suburb. Maggie greeted us at the door. She was thin with dark circles under her eyes, but had a warm smile. Sebastian stood slightly behind her, not making eye contact. Thank you for bringing him over, Maggie said. The boys are going to have so much fun. I knelt down to George's level. Be good, okay? Call me if you need anything. He nodded and followed Sebastian into the house. As I turned to leave, Maggie touched my arm. Olivia, I just want you to know, Sebastian really is trying. He has some challenges, but he's working on them. I smiled reassuringly. All kids go through phases. I'm sure they'll be fine. I wish I'd paid more attention to the unease I felt leaving that house. Maybe I would have taken George home right then. The next morning I picked George up around 10. He was unusually quiet in the car. Did you have fun? I asked. Kind of, he mumbled. Just kind of. What did you guys do? Played video games. Watched a movie. He was looking out the window, not at me. Was Sebastian nice to you? George hesitated. Most of the time. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. When we got home, he went straight to his room. Later that afternoon, I found him sitting on his bed, hugging his knees to his chest. George, what's wrong? Did something happen at Sebastian's? He looked up at me, and I could see fear in his eyes. Mom, Sebastian is weird. I sat down beside him. Weird how? George took a deep breath. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The door was closed, but there was light coming from underneath. I knocked, but nobody answered. So I opened it a little bit to see if anyone was in there. He stopped, his hands fidgeting with his bedspread. And? I prompted gently. Sebastian was standing in front of the mirror. He had candles lit all around the sink. He was talking to his reflection, but not like normal talking to yourself. He was having a conversation, like his reflection was answering him back. A chill ran down my spine. What was he saying? He kept calling himself Mr. Jim. He was saying stuff like, "Yes, Mr. Jim, I understand," and "No, Mr. Jim, I won't tell." Then he saw me in the mirror and turned around super fast. His face looked different, like it wasn't Sebastian anymore. I tried to keep my expression neutral, though my heart was racing. What did he do when he saw you? He just stared at me for a second, then smiled really big and said I should go back to bed. So I did. But later, I woke up again, and he was standing over me, whispering. Whispering what? George shook his head. I don't know. It wasn't English. It didn't sound like any language I've ever heard. It was like clicking sounds and humming, and his eyes were all weird, like they were too big for his face. I pulled George into a hug, feeling him trembling against me. Why didn't you call me? I was scared, he whispered. And in the morning, Sebastian acted totally normal, like nothing happened. He even made me pancakes. I called Maggie that afternoon. After several rings, she answered, sounding exhausted. "Olivia, I'm so sorry," she said before I could even explain why I was calling. "Sebastian told me what happened." "He did?" I was surprised. "What did he say?" Maggie was quiet for a moment. "He admitted to scaring George. The candles, the mirror thing. He gets these ideas sometimes. He's been seeing a psychiatrist for years." "What exactly is going on with Sebastian?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Another long pause. "The doctors aren't entirely sure. Possibly multiple personality disorder, possibly something else. He's been on medication, but sometimes he stops taking it without me knowing." Her voice cracked. "We've moved twice already because of incidents at his previous schools. I thought this time would be different." I felt a mix of emotions, sympathy for this struggling mother, fear for my son, and anger that she'd invited George over without warning me about Sebastian's condition. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said carefully, "but I wish you'd told me before the sleepover." "I know," she whispered. "I just wanted him to have a friend." After that conversation, I told George he didn't have to play with Sebastian anymore, but he shouldn't be mean to him either. George seemed relieved. 3 days later, the school called again. This time, Sebastian had physically attacked another student during recess, biting the child's arm hard enough to draw blood. He was expelled immediately. I tried calling Maggie to check on her, but her phone had been disconnected. That weekend, driven by concern and curiosity, I drove by their house. There was a "for rent" sign in the yard. The windows were bare, no curtains, no furniture visible. They were gone. I asked around the neighborhood, but no one seemed to know much about them. One elderly neighbor mentioned seeing a moving truck very early Thursday morning, but couldn't recall the company name. Another said they'd barely ever seen Sebastian or his mother in the 3 months they'd lived there. Most disturbing of all, when I contacted the school to get their forwarding address to send a card, the secretary told me they had no record of where the family had gone. No transfer papers had been requested for Sebastian. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. I even tried searching for them online, but found nothing. No social media profiles for Maggie, no mention of them anywhere. The real estate agent who'd handled the rental property said they'd paid 6 months' rent in advance, in cash, and had left without notice. That was 6 years ago. George is 15 now and has largely forgotten about Sebastian. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember the fear in my son's eyes that day. I still drive by that house sometimes. Different families have lived there over the years. None have stayed longer than a year. Maybe that's just coincidence, but sometimes, late at night, I find myself wondering about Sebastian and Mr. Jim. I wonder what might have happened to my son that night while he slept. And I wonder where Sebastian is now, what dark path he might be walking, and if there's another mother somewhere listening to her child describe a strange new friend who talks to his reflection in the mirror. Story 10. I'm still trying to process what happened last weekend. I can't sleep. I jump at every noise, and I'm convinced someone's watching me even in my own apartment. I need to get this off my chest, so maybe typing it out will help. My girlfriend Tiki and I have been together for about 3 years now. We both love the outdoors, hiking, camping, you name it. Last month, we decided to plan a desert camping trip. I've always been pretty experienced with outdoor survival. Grew up hunting with my dad, did a lot of backpacking in my 20s. Tiki got into it after we met, and she's become just as passionate about it. We wanted to get away from everything. No cell service, no people, just us and the stars. That was the main draw, the stars. If you've never been far enough from civilization to see the night sky without light pollution, you're missing out. At least, that's what I used to think. Now I'm not sure I ever want to be that isolated again. We picked a spot about 3 hours from the nearest town, way out in the desert. The last hour of driving was on dirt roads, and the final 20 minutes wasn't even on a road at all, just driving across hard-packed sand, using GPS coordinates I'd found on an obscure camping forum. The spot was supposed to have amazing views and complete isolation. When we arrived Thursday afternoon, it was perfect. A flat area for our tent surrounded by some larger rock formations that would block the wind. No sign that anyone had camped there recently, or maybe ever. I remember feeling so satisfied as we set up our tent, unpacked our gear, and gathered some scrub for a small fire. That first night was exactly what we wanted. We grilled some steaks on our portable camp stove, drank a couple beers, and laid on a blanket staring up at the incredible canopy of stars. The Milky Way was so vivid it looked like someone had painted it across the sky. Around 11, we heard a sound in the distance, kind of a scream, but definitely animal. Maybe a coyote or mountain lion. It was far enough away that we just exchanged glances and shrugged it off. Nature's nightlife, Tiki had said, squeezing my hand. We didn't give it another thought. The second day was spent hiking around the area, exploring the rock formations, taking pictures, and just enjoying being disconnected. No emails, no calls, no social media. That night was another perfect one, slightly cooler, so we kept the fire going a bit longer. We heard that scream again, same time, still distant. I remember thinking it was odd that it would happen at the same time 2 nights in a row, but again, we didn't worry about it. We were in their territory after all. Then came Saturday night. Everything changed. We'd had another great day, finished dinner around 8, and crawled into our tent around 10. I fell asleep almost immediately. Something about the desert air just knocks me out. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling our tent. My eyes shot open, but I didn't move. Tiki was still asleep beside me. The footsteps continued, and I felt my heart hammering so hard I was afraid it would wake her up. The steps stopped right outside the entrance to our tent. Then came the light. At first, it was just a dull orange glow through the fabric of the tent. Someone was standing right there with some kind of light source. I reached over and grabbed Tiki's arm, squeezing hard to wake her without making noise. She stirred, looked at me confused, then followed my gaze to the silhouette on the tent wall. The shape wasn't moving, just standing there, holding something that gave off that orange light. Seconds felt like hours. I was trying to formulate a plan. Our car keys were in my backpack at the foot of the sleeping bag. My knife was in my pants pocket, which I'd left just inside the tent door, too close to the silhouette. Then suddenly, the orange glow got much, much brighter. The tent fabric began to smoke, and I realized with horror what was happening. They were setting our tent on fire. "Get up! The tent's on fire!" I screamed, all thoughts of staying quiet gone. We scrambled for the tent zipper, but the fire was spreading fast. The synthetic material of our tent ignited quickly, and within seconds, flames were licking at the roof of the tent. I managed to get the zipper open and push Tiki out first. As we tumbled onto the sand, I looked around frantically for our attacker, but couldn't see anyone. The fire was consuming our tent rapidly. I ran to our cooler and grabbed our large water jug, dumping it over the burning tent. It helped control the flames, but half our tent was already destroyed. Tiki was in shock, standing there in her pajamas, staring at our burning shelter. I grabbed her hand. "We need to get out of here now," I said, my voice shaking. "Grab what you can. We're going to the car." We stuffed what we could salvage into our backpacks, our phones, wallets, my knife, a flashlight. The car was parked about 400 yards away, beyond a small ridge. We'd chosen the spot specifically because we couldn't see the car from our campsite. It ruined the wilderness experience. Now I was cursing that decision. It was around 2 in the morning, pitch black except for the dying embers of our tent and the beam from our single flashlight. We started moving quickly toward where we thought the car was, but in the darkness and panic, everything looked different. The rock formations I'd used as landmarks during the day were just looming shadows now. That's when we heard it again, that scream. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was close, and it didn't stop. It went on and on, this inhuman wailing sound that made my skin crawl. Then another scream joined it from a different direction, then another. "What the hell is that?" Tiki whispered, her fingers digging into my arm. "I don't know, but we need to move," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The car should be just over that ridge." We started moving faster, practically jogging, the beam of the flashlight bouncing wildly in front of us. The screams continued, seeming to come from all around us now. They didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. They almost sounded coordinated, like they were communicating. My mind was racing with terrifying possibilities. Was this some kind of sick hunting game? Were there people out here who lured campers to this remote spot to hunt them for sport? It seemed insane, but so did setting a stranger's tent on fire in the middle of nowhere. We crested a small hill, and I felt a surge of relief when the flashlight beam caught the reflection of our car's windshield. It was still about 200 yards away, but just seeing it gave me hope. That's when I noticed the flashlight beam reflecting off something else too. Eyes. Multiple pairs of eyes, low to the ground, between us and the car. They weren't animal eyes. They were too high up, and they were moving in a way that suggested bipedal motion. "Run," I said to Tiki, not even trying to be quiet anymore. "Run!" We sprinted toward the car, the screams getting louder and more frenzied. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them in my panic. Behind us, I could hear movement, fast, getting closer. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I finally got the car door unlocked, and we threw ourselves inside, locking the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. The screams were right outside the car now, and I caught glimpses of movement in the darkness around us. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, not caring about the rough terrain. Rocks and scrub thumped against the undercarriage as we bounced and skidded across the desert. I didn't slow down until we hit the dirt road, and even then, I was pushing the car to its limits. When we finally reached the paved highway and saw the headlights of another car passing by, I pulled over and just sat there, both of us breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. We reported everything to the police in the nearest town, but they seemed skeptical. They suggested it might have been other campers playing a prank, or that the fire could have started from embers from our own campfire. They took our statements but didn't seem in any hurry to investigate. It's been 5 days now. I keep replaying that night in my head, the footsteps, the orange glow, the screams coming from multiple directions, the eyes reflecting in our flashlight beam. I'm convinced that if we hadn't found the car when we did, we would have been killed out there. Our bodies would probably never have been found in that remote location. Tiki and I have barely spoken about it. I think we're both afraid that putting it into words will make it more real somehow. But I keep thinking about those screams. how they happened at the same time each night, getting closer, like they were testing our reactions or lulling us into a false sense of security. I've searched online for similar experiences in that area, but found nothing concrete. Just vague warnings on some forums about avoiding camping alone in certain parts of the desert. I don't know if what hunted us was human, animal, or something else entirely. All I know is that I'm never going back there, and I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe camping again. If you're planning a desert trip, stick to established campgrounds. Don't go looking for isolation, because sometimes you're not as alone out there as you think you are. And whatever's out there in the darkness, it might be hunting you. Story 11. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night in Wave Haven last summer. It's been 8 months, but I can't shake it. I've never been able to use a public bathroom since without checking every stall first and making sure the main door isn't lockable from the outside. So me and 4 of my college buddies rented this cheap Airbnb near the beach for Memorial Day weekend. It was this run-down little place about 3 blocks from the water. But hey, we were 22 and just wanted somewhere to crash between partying and hanging at the beach. The kind of place with mismatched furniture and that weird smell vacation rentals get when they're cleaned too quickly between guests. Saturday was our last night there. We'd spent the whole day at the beach, then grabbed some beers and hot dogs and made a bonfire down by the water. Nothing crazy, just hanging out, drinking, laughing about stupid college stories. By around midnight, the fire was dying down and everyone was getting tired. I'd had maybe 5 or 6 beers over several hours, not wasted, just buzzed enough to feel good. When everyone decided to head back to the Airbnb, I wasn't ready to call it a night. The weather was perfect, that warm ocean breeze that's not too hot or cold. I told my friends I wanted to walk off my buzz a bit before coming back. They tried to convince me to come with them, but I insisted I'd be fine. Looking back, I wish I'd listened to them. The boardwalk was practically deserted. Just a few lights still on at closed food stands, and those string lights they keep up year-round. It was peaceful, you know, just me and the sound of waves crashing. I remember feeling this weird sense of freedom walking alone, like I was the only person left in this tourist town. I must have walked for about 20 minutes when I realized I really needed to pee. All those beers catching up to me. I looked around, but everything was closed. The only option was this public restroom at the far end of the boardwalk. Even from a distance, I could tell it was one of those old concrete buildings that looks like it was built in the 70s and never properly renovated. As I got closer, I remember thinking how isolated it seemed. It sat between 2 closed seasonal shops, set back a bit from the main path. There was a single yellow light above the entrance, with moths circling it. The men's room door had this faded blue paint peeling off it. The moment I pushed open that door, the smell hit me, this overwhelming bleach scent that was clearly trying to mask something worse underneath. You know when a place smells too clean? Like someone's hiding something? That's what it was like. The fluorescent lights flickered, making this faint buzzing sound. 3 sinks lined one wall, 2 with visible rust stains, 4 stalls on the opposite wall, and 2 urinals. I decided to use the stall furthest from the door. Don't ask me why, just one of those automatic decisions. The stall door was covered in the usual graffiti, and the lock was this flimsy metal thing that didn't inspire much confidence. I remember noticing there wasn't any toilet paper and thinking, great, just my luck. I'd been in there maybe 30 seconds when I heard the main bathroom door creak open, slow, deliberate, then footsteps. But they weren't normal footsteps. They didn't follow a straight path like someone walking to a urinal or stall. They circled around, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes they sounded like they were coming from multiple directions at once, which I initially chalked up to the echo in there or my slightly buzzed state. The footsteps eventually stopped somewhere near the sinks. Then nothing. Complete silence. I finished up quickly, feeling suddenly very sober and increasingly uncomfortable. When I tried to open my stall door, it wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, thinking maybe it was just stuck, but it felt like something, or someone, was holding it shut from the other side. My heart started racing. I called out, "Hey, is someone there?" No response, just silence. I waited a few seconds, trying to stay calm, telling myself I was overreacting. Then I backed up as far as I could in that tiny stall and rammed my shoulder against the door. It gave way slightly, enough that I could feel whatever resistance was there yielding. I backed up again and hit it harder. This time it flew open. Just as I stumbled out, I caught a glimpse of the main bathroom door swinging shut, like someone had just rushed out. I stood there for a second, catching my breath, looking around. The bathroom appeared empty. All the stall doors were open except the one I'd been in. No one at the urinals. No one by the sinks. I practically ran to the exit door, grabbed the handle, and nothing. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, harder this time, jiggling it frantically. It was locked or jammed somehow. That's when real panic set in. I was trapped in this disgusting public bathroom in the middle of the night, on a nearly deserted boardwalk, with someone who had just tried to keep me locked in a stall and had now apparently locked me in the entire bathroom. I pulled out my phone, 2% battery and barely any signal. Of course, that's when I heard it, a slight shuffling sound from one of the stalls behind me. I turned slowly, staring at the row of supposedly empty stalls. All the doors were open, but as I looked more carefully, I realized I couldn't see any feet under one of the partitions. Someone was standing on a toilet to hide themselves from view. My mouth went completely dry. I looked around desperately for another way out. There was a small, grimy window high up on the wall near the ceiling, the kind that tilts open for ventilation. It looked barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was my only option. I climbed onto one of the sinks, praying it wouldn't tear from the wall under my weight. It creaked horribly but held. The window was caked with years of grime and salt from the ocean air. I pushed against it, and it resisted at first, then suddenly gave way, tilting inward. Fresh air rushed in, and I could see the dark parking lot behind the building, about 7 feet below. I was halfway through the window, awkwardly positioned with my upper body outside and my legs still inside, when I heard a stall door bang open behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel someone rushing toward me. I pushed myself through that window with every ounce of strength I had, scraping my back raw against the frame. I fell hard onto the pavement below, landing awkwardly on my knee. The pain was immediate and intense, but adrenaline took over. As I scrambled to my feet, I glanced up at the window and saw a face looking down at me. It's hard to describe what was so wrong about that face. It was a man, probably around 50, but with this strange, ageless quality. His skin was unnaturally pale under the fluorescent lights, almost bluish. His eyes seemed too wide, too alert. But what really got to me was his expression, this bizarre mix of anger and disappointment, like I'd ruined something he'd been planning for a long time. I ran. Despite my injured knee, I ran faster than I ever have in my life, across that empty parking lot, back toward the boardwalk, toward lights and potential people. I didn't stop until I reached a closed ice cream shop where I could see an employee inside cleaning up. I pounded on the door until the startled teenager inside let me in. My phone died right after I called the police. The kid working there let me use their phone to call my friends, who showed up before the cops did. When the police finally arrived, they took my statement and checked out the bathroom. They found scratch marks around the door handle where someone had tampered with it to make it lock from the outside. But there was no sign of the man. The cops said without security cameras in the area, apparently the town had been meaning to install some, but never got around to it. And with me leaving town the next day, there wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report and increasing patrols in the area. I've spent months trying to make sense of what happened. Who was this guy? Had he followed me from the bonfire? Or was he just waiting there for anyone unlucky enough to walk in? How long had he been doing this? What would have happened if I hadn't gotten out? Sometimes I tell myself I overreacted, that maybe it was just some homeless guy looking for shelter who got scared when I noticed him. But then I remember the calculated way those footsteps moved around the bathroom, how deliberately the main door was locked, how he hid himself in that stall. This wasn't random. This was someone who knew what he was doing. I still have nightmares about that face looking down at me from the window, about what might have happened if I'd been a little slower, a little more drunk, a little less lucky. I've never gone back to Wave Haven, and I never will. Some places just stay with you for all the wrong reasons. Story 12. I still can't believe what happened to us at Willow Lake that summer. It's been 3 years, but I get chills thinking about it. I've never posted about this before, but I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. My dad had this small cabin near Willow Lake that belonged to my grandfather. We'd go there every summer. Me, my 2 younger sisters, Emma and Lily, and Dad. Mom stopped coming after the divorce, so it was just the 4 of us. The cabin was really isolated, which we used to think was awesome. No neighbors for miles, no other campers, just wilderness. Now that isolation seems terrifying. That particular summer started off normal. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in July. The cabin was exactly as we left it the year before, musty, with cobwebs in the corners, and that familiar smell of pine and old wood. Dad always joked that spiders were our summer roommates. We spent the first evening cleaning, unpacking, and setting up our stuff for the week ahead. The next day was perfect, sunny but not too hot. Dad suggested we take the inner tubes to the lake. We had these old black truck inner tubes we'd float around on. The lake wasn't huge, but it was deep and crystal clear. You could see straight to the bottom near the shore. That morning, there was this mist hanging over the water. It wasn't unusual for Willow Lake. Mornings were often foggy until the sun burned it away. Dad stayed at the cabin to fix some loose boards on the deck while I took my sisters to the lake. Emma was 15, Lily 13, and I was 17 at the time. We were floating maybe 30 feet from shore. I remember being half asleep on my tube, trailing my fingers in the cold water, when I heard Emma whisper, "What is that?" I lifted my head and saw both my sisters staring toward the opposite shore, about 100 yards away. The mist was thicker over there, so at first I didn't see anything. "There's something on the shore," Lily said, her voice shaking. I squinted and finally saw what they were looking at. Through the mist, there was this pale shape at the water's edge. My first thought was that it was a dog, maybe a stray or someone's pet that had wandered off. But something felt off about it. The proportions weren't right. We all went quiet, just watching. Then the thing stood up. It didn't stand like a normal animal. It was jerky, unnatural, like someone had grabbed a puppet and yanked it upright. It was still on all fours, but its front legs, or arms, I don't know, were extended in a way that made it much taller than any dog should be. It was pale, almost hairless looking. Then it turned its head toward us. Even from that distance, I could see its eyes. They were just wrong. Deep, dark, empty. Not animal eyes, not human eyes either. Just these black voids that seemed to be staring right at us. Emma started crying quietly. I remember reaching out and grabbing her tube to pull her closer. The thing stayed perfectly still for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it dropped back down on all fours and bolted into the trees. It didn't move like a dog or a deer or anything I've ever seen. It was fast, unnaturally fast, and the way it moved was all wrong, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. "Let's go back," I said, and we all started paddling frantically toward our shore. When we got to the cabin, we told Dad what we saw. He listened carefully, but then suggested it was probably just a deer or maybe even a bear standing on its hind legs. He reminded us that things can look strange in the mist, and distances can be deceptive over water. I wanted to believe him. We all did. But I knew what I saw wasn't a deer or a bear. The rest of the day passed without incident. We played board games, Dad grilled burgers, and we tried to forget about what happened. That night, we decided to sleep in the large tent we'd set up in the clearing beside the cabin. It was something we did every summer. Dad called it our wilderness night. Usually it was fun, listening to the forest sounds and telling stories before falling asleep. We were all in our sleeping bags around 11. Dad had a small battery-powered lantern that cast this soft yellow glow inside the tent. Outside, it was pitch black. There was no moon that night, and the forest around us was dense enough that even starlight barely filtered through. I was almost asleep when I heard it, footsteps in the dry leaves around the tent. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a deer. The footsteps were light but deliberate. They circled the tent once, slowly, then stopped. "Dad," I whispered, "do you hear that?" He was already awake, sitting up in his sleeping bag. "Probably just an animal," he said, but I could tell by his voice that he wasn't convinced. The footsteps started again, circling our tent. This time they were faster, and they didn't sound like an animal anymore. They were too rhythmic, too purposeful. Emma and Lily were awake now, too. Emma grabbed my arm so tight it hurt. "What is it?" Lily asked, her voice small and terrified. "Nothing to worry about," Dad said, but he reached for the hunting knife he always kept in his backpack. The footsteps stopped again, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the kind of silence that feels like pressure against your ears. We all held our breath, waiting. That's when we heard it. A low, rumbling growl that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't a bear or a wolf or a mountain lion. It was deeper, almost like it was coming from something with a chest twice the size of a human's. But there was this strange quality to it that made the hair on my arm stand up. It sounded wrong, like it was trying to mimic an animal sound but couldn't quite get it right. Dad grabbed one of the empty beer bottles he'd brought to the tent and threw it hard into the trees where the growl had come from. We heard the glass shatter against something. For a few seconds, there was silence again. Then something hit the side of our tent with a dull thud. At first, I thought it was a rock, but when Emma screamed, I saw what it was. A shard of the same beer bottle covered in dirt like it had been driven into the ground and pulled back out. It had sliced through the tent fabric and cut Emma's arm. Not deep, but enough to draw blood. "What the hell?" Dad whispered, his face pale in the lantern light. The footsteps started again, but this time they were running, circling our tent faster and faster. It sounded like whatever it was had uneven, awkward steps, but it was moving with incredible speed. The ground seemed to shake slightly with each footfall. Lily was sobbing now, and Emma was pressing her sleeve against the cut on her arm. Dad had his knife out, though what good it would do against whatever was out there, I don't know. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. The circling continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes it would slow down, almost stop, and we'd hear that deep, wrong growling again, closer to the tent wall. Other times it would speed up until it sounded like there were multiple things running around us. At one point, something brushed against the tent, not hitting it, but like it was running its hand, paw, along the fabric as it passed. I remember the tent material dimpling inward in a line about 5 feet long, like something with long fingers was dragging them along the side. None of us slept. We sat huddled together in the middle of the tent, Dad with his knife pointed at the entrance, the rest of us too terrified to move. I remember my bladder was bursting, but there was no way in hell I was going outside. The footsteps and growling continued on and off all night. Sometimes there would be silence for 20 or 30 minutes, and we'd start to hope it was gone. Then it would start again. That uneven circling, that wrong growl. When the first light of dawn finally came, everything stopped. The forest went quiet in that normal early morning way. Birds started chirping. It was like whatever had been terrorizing us all night just vanished. Dad unzipped the tent and looked outside. Nothing, just our normal campsite, the trees, the path leading down to the lake. But there were footprints in the dirt around our tent. Weird, uneven impressions that didn't look like any animal tracks I've ever seen. Some looked almost human, but too large and with the wrong number of toes. Others were more animal-like, but with this strange drag mark beside them. We packed up in record time. Nobody said much. Emma's arm had stopped bleeding, but the cut was angry and red. Dad poured some whiskey on it to clean it and wrapped it in a bandana. As we were loading the car, I looked toward the lake. The morning mist was still heavy over the water, but for a second, I thought I saw that pale figure again, standing at the far shore, watching us. By the time I blinked and looked harder, it was gone. Maybe it was never there. Maybe it was just a trick of the light on the fog. I don't know. We never went back to Willow Lake. Dad sold the cabin the following year to some guy who wanted a hunting retreat. I sometimes wonder if I should have warned him about what happened, but what would I even say? Hey, there's some kind of monster that circles tents and throws glass at people. Emma still has the scar on her arm. It healed weird, raised and slightly darker than the rest of her skin. Lily refuses to go camping anywhere now. Dad doesn't talk about that night. I've looked into local legends about Willow Lake since then, but never found anything specific. Some vague stories about people going missing over the years, but nothing concrete. No descriptions of pale creatures with black eyes. I still don't know what it was. Some kind of animal? A person playing a sick joke? Something else entirely? All I know is that it was real, it was there, and to this day, the sound of footsteps circling in dry leaves makes my heart race. Story 13. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night in 2013. It's been over a decade now, but I can recall every detail like it was yesterday. I had just moved to Providence, Rhode Island, with my 4-year-old daughter, Lily. It was supposed to be our fresh start. I'd landed a better-paying job at an insurance company, and after a messy divorce, I was ready to build something new for us. The townhouse we found was perfect, spacious, affordable, and in what seemed like a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it had a small backyard where Lily could play, and the monthly payments were within my budget as a single mom. Our neighbor on the adjoining side was this sweet elderly gentleman named Ben. He must have been in his 70s, always wearing these old-fashioned suspenders and greeting us with a warm smile whenever we crossed paths. Ben would sometimes bring over homemade cookies for Lily and ask how we were settling in. He lived alone and mentioned his wife had passed away a few years back. He seemed like the grandfather figure I never had growing up, and I felt safer knowing someone kind lived next door. I wasn't naive, though. A couple blocks over, things got rough pretty quickly. There had been some break-ins reported in the area over the previous months, but nothing on our specific street. I figured we were okay, especially with the deadbolts I had installed right after moving in. About a week before it happened, I was scrolling through Facebook late one night after putting Lily to bed. I came across one of those safety tip posts that usually make me roll my eyes. You know the ones? The kind of advice that feels paranoid and over the top? This particular post suggested keeping your car keys by your bedside so that if you hear an intruder, you can press the panic button and set off your car alarm to scare them away or alert neighbors. I don't know why, but something made me take this advice seriously. Maybe it was being in a new place or being solely responsible for my daughter's safety. Whatever the reason, I started keeping my keys on my nightstand each night before bed. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. I used to just toss them in a bowl by the front door. On that night, it was a Tuesday in early November, I was up reading in bed around 11:30. Lily had been asleep for hours in her room down the hall. I remember it was unusually cold for early November, and I had the heat cranked up higher than I normally would. While reading, I heard what sounded like a car door closing outside. Nothing alarming, just that distinctive thunk sound. But something about it made me uneasy. I got up and peeked through my bedroom window, which faced the street. I didn't see anything unusual, just the empty street with cars parked along both sides, dimly lit by streetlights. No movement, no people walking around, nothing out of place. I told myself I was being paranoid and got back in bed. I'd been having trouble sleeping in the new place, so I took a melatonin tablet, finished my chapter, and switched off my bedside lamp around midnight. I remember checking the baby monitor one last time. Lily was sound asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. I must have fallen asleep quickly, because the next thing I remember was jolting awake to what felt like an earthquake. My entire room seemed to shake with a loud thud that vibrated through the wall. I shot upright, my heart instantly racing. My first thought was that something had fallen over, maybe a bookshelf? But the sound came from the shared wall with Ben's place. I checked my phone, 3:17 a.m. My parental instincts kicked in immediately, and I rushed to Lily's room. She was still fast asleep, completely undisturbed. I stood there for a moment, watching her breathe peacefully, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I had dreamed the noise. That's when I heard another bang, not as loud as the first one, but definitely real. It sounded like something heavy hitting the floor, and again, it seemed to be coming from Ben's side of the townhouse. My stomach knotted with dread. Something was wrong. Should I call Ben to check on him? Should I call the police? It was the middle of the night. What if he had just knocked something over and I was overreacting? The last thing I wanted was to be that hysterical new neighbor who called the cops over nothing. I remembered my car keys on the nightstand and grabbed them, clutching them tightly in my sweaty palm as I crept downstairs. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening in the silence. I checked all the doors and windows on the first floor. Everything was locked up tight. I stood in my dark living room, listening intently, my finger hovering over the panic button on my key fob, ready to press it at the slightest sound. Minutes passed. Nothing. No more thuds, no voices, no unusual sounds at all. Just the normal hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the main road a block away. After about 15 minutes of standing, frozen in my living room, I started to feel ridiculous. What was I doing? I was exhausted and probably just jumpy from being in a new place. I decided to go back to bed, but I kept my keys with me, placing them right next to my head on the pillow. It took forever to fall back asleep. I kept thinking I heard things, little creaks and shifts that were probably just the house settling. Eventually, the melatonin kicked in again, and I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next morning was a normal Wednesday. I got Lily ready for preschool, made her favorite breakfast, peanut butter toast cut into triangles, and drove her to school before heading to work. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I didn't even think about the noises from the night before until I got home that evening. As I pulled into my driveway around 5:30, I noticed several police cars parked in front of Ben's side of the townhouse. My heart sank immediately. I hurried inside to drop off my things and then went straight back out to see what was happening. One of the officers was standing near Ben's front door, and I approached him, explaining that I was the next-door neighbor. What he told me made my blood run cold. 3 men had broken into Ben's townhouse the previous night. They had tied him up at gunpoint and robbed him of thousands of dollars worth of valuables, electronics, and even his car. The officer said Ben had been tied up for over 12 hours before he managed to free himself enough to reach a phone and call for help. I felt sick as the officer continued. Based on the timeline Ben had given them, the break-in had occurred shortly after midnight. The thuds I heard, that was Ben being knocked to the floor and restrained. The men had gagged him, which explained why I didn't hear any cries for help. But the detail that haunts me most came next. Ben told the police that while the men were ransacking his home, one of them mentioned seeing a woman, me, looking out her window earlier. They had apparently been watching both our homes and decided to wait until my lights went off before breaking into Ben's place. They had seen me. They had waited for me to go to bed. They knew my daughter and I were home alone. I was allowed to see Ben briefly at the hospital later that evening. After arranging for a friend to watch Lily, I rushed over, consumed with guilt. He had a nasty bruise on his temple and looked exhausted, but he smiled when he saw me. I apologized over and over for not doing more, for not calling the police when I heard those noises. What he said next broke my heart. While he was tied up, terrified and in pain, he said he kept thinking about how grateful he was that it wasn't me and my little one who had to experience this trauma. Here was this man who had just gone through something horrific, and he was thinking about our safety. The police never caught the men who did this. They found Ben's car abandoned in a parking lot about 20 miles away, wiped clean of fingerprints. The detective told me these were likely experienced criminals who knew exactly what they were doing. I bought a taser and mace the very next day. I installed a security system with cameras. I practiced what I would do if someone broke in. For months afterward, I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard someone in the house. What haunts me most is the randomness of it all. If I hadn't seen that Facebook post about keeping car keys nearby, if I hadn't woken up to those thuds, if I had called the police right away, the what-ifs are endless and torturous. Ben moved in with his daughter in Massachusetts a month later. I can't blame him. Before he left, he hugged me and said, "Don't let fear rule your life, Olivia." We survived. I tried to take his advice, but I've never been the same. I still live in that townhouse with Lily. She's a teenager now and has no memory of that night. But I remember every time I hear an unusual sound in the night, every time I see a car I don't recognize parked on our street, every time I check the locks before bed, I remember. And I always keep my car keys right next to me while I sleep. Story 14. I never thought I'd be sharing this story online, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar, or maybe writing this will help me make sense of what happened. Either way, I still get chills thinking about that night 6 months ago. I was in a really bad place after Lisa left. 5 years together, and suddenly she was gone. The house felt too big, too empty. We'd bought it together with plans to start a family someday, but instead I found myself alone in our 2-story suburban dream home in Brighton Hills. The neighborhood had always seemed so safe. That's why we chose it. Young families, retirees watering their lawns, people walking their dogs at dusk, that perfect suburban bubble. After the breakup, I pretty much shut down. I called in sick to work so many times that my boss eventually put me on leave. I barely showered. Takeout containers piled up in the kitchen. I dragged myself from the bedroom to the bathroom to the kitchen and back again. Most days, I just lay in bed watching whatever garbage popped up on my streaming recommendations. Didn't matter what it was, reality shows, documentaries, old sitcoms, anything to fill the silence. That Saturday night, it was the last weekend in October, I was up in my bedroom watching some low-budget horror movie I'd never heard of. I remember feeling slightly better that day. I'd actually showered and changed my sheets. Small victories, right? It was around 9 in the evening, and I was wrapped in my comforter with a bag of chips, mindlessly staring at the screen. About halfway through the movie, I started noticing this weird metallic clanging sound. At first, I thought it was part of the film. The audio mixing was terrible anyway. It was this rhythmic tapping, like someone gently striking metal against metal. It wasn't particularly loud, but it was consistent. I remember adjusting the volume on my TV, thinking maybe the sound system was acting up. After about 15 minutes of this, I had to pee. I paused the movie and got up to use the bathroom, but the sound didn't stop. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from the TV at all. It was coming from outside my house. I felt a chill run down my spine. Living alone in a relatively quiet neighborhood, you become attuned to the normal sounds. The neighbor's dog barking at squirrels, kids playing basketball down the street, cars pulling into driveways. This wasn't any of those. I walked back into my bedroom and cautiously approached the window that overlooked the backyard. My curtains were drawn, as they had been for weeks. I didn't want neighbors seeing what a mess I'd become. I carefully pulled back the edge of the curtain, just enough to peek out without being noticed. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a kid, couldn't have been older than 10, standing in the middle of my backyard, just standing there, completely still except for one arm, which was rhythmically tapping what looked like a PVC pipe against one of my deck chairs. The chair had been moved from my deck to the center of the lawn, which made no sense. I never moved it there. The kid was wearing jeans and a dark hoodie pulled up over their head. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl in the dim light. The only illumination came from my neighbor's porch light and the partial moon. The child's face was downturned, focused entirely on the tapping motion. My first instinct was concern. What was a kid doing alone in my backyard at 9 at night? Was he lost? But something felt wrong. The methodical tapping, the moved chair, the stillness of the child's body, except for that one arm creating the metallic sound. I'd been hearing that sound for almost an hour without realizing it. How long had the kid been standing there? I considered my options. I could call out to the kid through the window, but that felt risky somehow. I could call the police, but what would I say? There's a child tapping a pipe in my yard? They'd think I was crazy or overreacting. I decided the most reasonable approach was to go downstairs, turn on the exterior lights, and check on the situation myself. I made my way down the stairs, feeling strangely hesitant with each step. The tapping continued, unchanged in its rhythm. When I reached the first floor, I went to the back door in the kitchen. My hand hovered over the switch for the porch light. Something stopped me. Call it instinct or paranoia, but something didn't feel right. Instead of turning on the light or opening the door, I moved to the side window that gave another view of the backyard. That's when I saw them. Two men dressed in black crouched on either side of my back door. They were pressed against the wall of the house, completely silent and perfectly still. One held what looked like a crowbar. The other had a knife reflecting the faint moonlight. They were waiting for me to open the door. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The child wasn't lost or playing a prank. The child was bait. That rhythmic tapping had been going on for an hour, designed to eventually draw me outside. And I had almost fallen for it. My hand started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my phone as I fumbled to unlock it. I backed away from the window, praying they hadn't seen me. I retreated to the hallway, as far from any windows as I could get, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered frantically, explaining the situation. There are men outside my house trying to break in. They're using a child as bait. She told me to stay on the line and find a secure room to hide in. Police were on their way, estimated arrival time 4 minutes. I told her I was going to my upstairs bathroom, no windows, solid door with a lock. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it, the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. They weren't waiting anymore. They were coming in. Panic surged through me. I sprinted up the remaining stairs, down the hallway, and into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it. The dispatcher was still on the line, asking what was happening. I told her they had broken in and asked how far away the police were. 3 minutes, she said. Those were the longest 3 minutes of my life. I could hear them moving through the house below me. Heavy footsteps, drawers being pulled open, the sound of items being knocked over, then footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. I pressed myself against the bathroom door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I heard them checking rooms, doors opening and closing. Then a voice outside the bathroom door. "We know you're in there." The doorknob rattled violently. I yelled out, "The police are on their way. They'll be here any second." There was a pause, then a heavy impact against the door that made it shudder. They were trying to kick it down. Another impact. The frame cracked slightly. I was sobbing into the phone now, begging the dispatcher to hurry the police. Then, faintly in the distance, I heard sirens. The men must have heard them too because the kicking stopped. There were hurried whispers I couldn't make out, then the sound of rapid footsteps heading back down the stairs. By the time the police arrived 2 minutes later, the men were gone. So was the child. The officers searched the entire property and surrounding area, but found nothing. The back door window had been smashed, and there were footprints in the soft soil of my garden beds, but no other evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could identify who had tried to get to me. One of the officers, an older guy with tired eyes, sat with me in my living room as I gave my statement. When I mentioned the child, his expression darkened. "This isn't random," he said. "This was planned. Using a kid as bait means these weren't just opportunistic burglars. They targeted you specifically." That thought haunted me more than anything else. Why me? Was it because they knew I was alone and vulnerable after Lisa left? Had they been watching me? How long had they been planning this? And what about that child? The officer suggested the kid might be related to one of the men, or possibly even coerced or trafficked. That made me sick to my stomach. I kept picturing that small figure standing motionless in my yard, tapping away with mechanical precision. I couldn't stay in the house after that. I packed some essentials and checked into a hotel for a week, then stayed with my brother until I could find a new place. I installed security cameras, motion detector lights, and an alarm system at my new apartment. I started therapy. I got back to work. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. But I still think about that night. I still wake up sometimes, hearing that metallic tapping in my dreams. I wonder about that child and if they're safe. I wonder if those men targeted anyone else after me, or if they had targeted others before. I wonder if they're still out there, watching and waiting. The police never found them. The case is technically still open, but I know it's at the bottom of some detective's pile. No one was hurt. Nothing valuable was stolen. Just another attempted break-in in the statistics. But I know it was more than that. It was calculated. It was patient. And if I hadn't looked out that side window before opening the back door, I don't like to think about what would have happened to me. So I'm sharing this as a warning. Trust your instincts. Be aware of unusual sounds, even if they seem innocent. And remember that sometimes the most unsettling threats don't announce themselves with a bang. They announce themselves with a quiet, persistent tapping designed to lure you right where they want you. Story 15. I still can't shake what happened at Chingasa last year during quarantine. I've been trying to make sense of it for months, but I just can't find a logical explanation. I'm writing this down, hoping someone might have experienced something similar or can offer some insight, because honestly, I'm still freaked out. It was my 25th birthday, and after being stuck inside for what felt like forever during lockdown, my friends and I were desperate to get out of the city. Colombia had just started easing restrictions, and I convinced my 3 closest friends, Ana, Diego, and Camila, to drive with me to Chingasa National Reserve outside of Bogotá. I'd been there once before with my family when I was younger and remembered it being beautiful, with rolling Paramo landscapes and these incredible lagoons. We left Bogotá early that morning, around 6, with the car packed full of food, drinks, and a small cake Camilla had baked for my birthday. The drive up was foggy, and it was drizzling the whole way, but we were in high spirits, singing along to music and just enjoying being outside our apartments for once. The weather actually worked in our favor because the reserve wasn't crowded at all. I guess most people had seen the forecast and decided to stay home. As we drove up the winding mountain road toward Chingasa, the rain got heavier and visibility dropped to maybe 20 meters. Diego was driving, gripping the steering wheel tightly and leaning forward, squinting through the windshield. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked, and I almost suggested turning back. But we'd come this far, and honestly, after being cooped up for so long, even sitting in the car watching rain felt like an adventure. We reached the entrance to the reserve around 9 in the morning. The ranger at the checkpoint looked surprised to see visitors in this weather, but gave us a map and warned us to be careful on the trails since they'd be slippery. He mentioned that if the weather didn't improve, we should consider turning back by early afternoon to avoid driving down the mountain in the dark. We decided to head straight to the main lagoon, Laguna de Chingasa. It's about a 40-minute drive from the entrance on this rough dirt road. The fog was so thick we could barely see anything beyond the edges of the road. Anna kept joking about horror movies that start this way, which in hindsight wasn't the best thing to bring up. When we finally parked near the trailhead to the lagoon, we just sat in the car for a while, watching the rain hammer down on the windshield. It was cold up there, probably around 7 degrees Celsius, and the car windows kept fogging up. We ate some sandwiches we'd packed and decided to wait a bit to see if the weather would clear. And then, like something out of a movie, it did. Within 20 minutes, the rain stopped completely and the fog began to lift. We couldn't believe our luck. We grabbed our backpacks, the cake, and some drinks and started walking toward the lagoon. The trail was muddy and slippery, but as we walked, more and more of the landscape revealed itself. The Paramo ecosystem is unlike anything else. These strange, fuzzy-looking frailejon plants scattered across rolling hills, with mountains rising in the distance. The air felt incredibly clean and crisp after the rain, and there was this sense of complete isolation that was both peaceful and a little eerie. We reached the lagoon around 11, and by then, the fog had cleared completely. The water was this deep blue-green color, perfectly still and reflecting the mountains and clouds. It was breathtaking. What struck me as odd, though, was how quickly the ground had dried. Despite the heavy rain earlier, the grass and rocks around the lagoon's edge weren't as wet as they should have been. I mentioned this to the others, but they were too busy taking photos to really think about it. We found a flat area about 20 meters from the water's edge to set up our little birthday picnic. Diego pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker, and we played some music while Camilla arranged the cake and lit a couple of candles. The whole scene was perfect. This stunning landscape all to ourselves, good friends, and for once, not thinking about the pandemic or being stuck at home. They sang happy birthday to me, and I was about to blow out the candles when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just an echo of their singing bouncing off the mountains. But as they finished the song, the sound continued. It was a humming, soft, melodic, but definitely not coming from any of us. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, the candles still flickering in front of me. They all went quiet, and the humming became more distinct. It sounded like a woman's voice, but I couldn't make out any words, just this haunting melody that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Where is that coming from?" Anna whispered, turning to look behind her. Diego stood up, scanning the area. "Maybe there are other hikers?" But we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail, and the reserve had been practically empty. The humming continued, sometimes fading slightly before growing stronger again, like whoever was doing it was moving around. That's when I saw her. Standing at the edge of the lagoon, maybe 50 meters away, was a woman in a long black dress. She had her back to us, facing the water, and long dark hair that hung down to her waist. I froze, the cake forgotten in front of me. "Guys," I said, my voice barely audible, "there's someone over there." Diego followed my gaze. "I see her too. What the hell is she doing out here alone?" Anna and Camilla both looked in the same direction, but had confused expressions. "What are you talking about?" "There's nobody there," Camilla said, squinting toward the water. I thought she was joking at first, but the look on her face was completely serious. Anna agreed with her. They couldn't see anyone, but Diego and I could see the woman clear as day. She hadn't moved, just stood there facing the water, and the humming continued, now definitely coming from her direction. The melody was strangely familiar, like a lullaby I might have heard as a child, but couldn't quite place. "This isn't funny, guys," Anna said, looking genuinely disturbed. "If you're trying to scare us, it's working." "I'm not joking," I insisted. "Diego, you see her, right? The woman in the black dress by the water?" He nodded slowly, his face pale. "Yeah, I do. But why can't they see her?" As we were talking, the humming suddenly got louder, so loud it sounded like it was right next to us. All four of us heard it now, and Anna grabbed my arm so tight it hurt. "What the fuck is that?" she whispered. "It sounds like it's right behind me." We all spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty Paramo stretching out behind us. When I looked back toward the lagoon, the woman was gone. But the humming continued for another few seconds before abruptly stopping, leaving us in a silence that felt heavier than before. No one spoke for what felt like forever. My birthday cake sat forgotten, the candles now burned out. I realized I was shaking, and not just from the cold. "Let's go," Diego finally said. "Now." No one argued. We packed up everything in record time, not even bothering to properly store the cake or fold the blanket we'd been sitting on. The whole time, I kept glancing toward the lagoon, half expecting to see the woman again. As we hurried back down the trail, I remembered something that made my blood run cold. On my previous visit to Chingasa years ago, I'd seen a similar figure, a woman in dark clothing standing by the water. I'd thought it was just another tourist then and hadn't mentioned it to anyone. But now, the coincidence seemed impossible to ignore. The walk back to the car was tense. No one spoke much, and we all kept close together. The beautiful landscape that had seemed so peaceful earlier now felt watchful, like the mountains themselves were observing us. Once we reached the car, we practically dove inside. Diego started the engine immediately, and we began the drive back toward Bogotá. It was only about 1 in the afternoon, but none of us suggested staying longer or visiting another part of the reserve. After we'd been driving for about 20 minutes, Diego finally broke the silence. "I need to tell you guys something about what I saw," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "That woman by the lagoon, she wasn't standing on the ground." Anna made a confused noise from the back seat. "What do you mean? You said you saw a woman standing there." Diego swallowed hard. "I did, but she didn't have any feet. It looked like she was just hovering slightly above the ground." A chill ran down my spine because I'd noticed the same thing, but had been trying to convince myself I was seeing things. The bottom of her black dress just sort of ended, with nothing beneath it. Camilla, who'd been quiet since we left the lagoon, suddenly spoke up. "There are stories about Chingasa, you know. My grandmother used to talk about a spirit that lives in the lagoons. They say she calls to people with her singing." "Why didn't you mention this before?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Because they're just old stories. I didn't think they were real," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. "My grandmother said the spirit was once a woman who drowned herself in one of the lagoons after losing her family. They say she appears to people who are celebrating or happy because she's jealous of their joy." The car fell silent again. The fog had returned, surrounding us as we drove down the mountain, making it feel like we were suspended in a cloud, cut off from the rest of the world. I've thought about that day constantly since then. None of us has been back to Chingasa, and honestly, we rarely even talk about what happened. It's like there's this unspoken agreement to pretend it didn't happen. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I can still hear that humming, that strange, beautiful melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I don't know what we experienced that day. Maybe it was some weird acoustic phenomenon, and a hiker we didn't notice. Maybe the fog and isolation played tricks on our minds. Or maybe Camilla's grandmother's stories had some truth to them. All I know is that something was there with us at the lagoon. Something that only Diego and I could see, but all of us could hear. And whatever it was, it knew we were there, and it was watching us. I still catch myself looking over my shoulder sometimes, half expecting to see a woman in a black dress with no feet, humming that haunting melody. Story 16. I still get chills thinking about it. It's been 8 months since that day, but I can't stop checking the radiation detector app on my phone or worrying about every headache or bout of nausea. The doctors say I'm fine, that my exposure was minimal, but how can they be sure? How can anyone be sure? It was just a regular Saturday morning in July, the kind of muggy Florida day where you can feel the air sticking to your skin the moment you step outside. I remember being annoyed that my air conditioning was struggling to keep up with the heat. I'd been cooped up all week working from home, so I decided to hit up some yard sales in Pinecrest, just to get out, you know? I wasn't even planning to buy anything. My apartment was already cluttered enough, and I'd been trying to declutter, not add more junk. But I love the thrill of the hunt, the possibility of finding something unique or valuable mixed in with all the discarded kids' toys and outdated electronics. The third sale I visited was at this charming old bungalow with a massive banyan tree in the front yard. An elderly woman sat in a folding chair under an umbrella, fanning herself with a magazine. She had that frail look, like a strong breeze might blow her away, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "Everything's priced to sell," she called out as I approached. "My daughter says I need to downsize before I move to the retirement community." I browsed through the usual stuff. Some vintage costume jewelry, old paperbacks with yellowed pages, kitchen gadgets that probably hadn't been used in decades. Nothing that caught my interest. I was about to thank her and leave when I noticed something partially hidden under a card table covered with china plates. It was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox but heavier looking, with a tarnished brass latch. Something about it drew me in immediately. Maybe it was the way it seemed deliberately tucked away, or how out of place it looked among the domestic items. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the box. The old woman squinted and leaned forward in her chair. "Oh, that old thing. It was my uncle's. Been sitting in my attic for years." "What's inside?" I asked, crouching down to get a better look without touching it. She shrugged. "No idea. Never opened it. Uncle Morris was a bit of an odd duck. Brilliant man. Worked in some government lab back in the 50s, but very secretive about his work. After he passed, we found that among his things. That should have been my first warning sign. Government lab. Secretive work. The 50s, the height of the Cold War, nuclear testing, all that stuff. But instead, my curiosity kicked into overdrive. "How much?" I asked. $5, she said without hesitation, like she was eager to be rid of it. Another red flag I ignored. I handed over the cash, and she didn't even count it. Just stuffed it in the fanny pack around her waist and went back to fanning herself. I picked up the box, surprised by its weight. It must have weighed at least 15 pounds. As I lifted it, I felt something, a subtle vibration, almost like a hum coming from inside. At first, I thought maybe there was a battery-operated device in there, still running after all these years. Or maybe it was just my imagination, heightened by the mysterious nature of the find. "Thanks," I said, but the woman had already turned her attention to another customer, a man haggling over the price of a lamp. Walking back to my car, the vibration seemed to intensify. It wasn't loud or even particularly noticeable, but it was there. a steady, almost rhythmic sensation against my palms. My heart started racing with excitement. What had I found? An antique electronic device? Some kind of vintage scientific instrument? I carefully placed the box on the passenger seat of my car and drove home, stealing glances at it at every stoplight. The vibration continued, and now I was sure it wasn't my imagination. There was something active inside that box. Back in my apartment, I placed it on my kitchen counter and just stared at it for a few minutes. The box itself was nothing special, plain steel with a bit of rust around the edges, that brass latch I mentioned, and no markings or labels. But what was inside? I grabbed my phone and took a few pictures, thinking I might want to document this moment of discovery. Then, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, I flipped the latch. The lid opened smoothly, no creaking hinges or dramatic resistance. Inside, nestled in what looked like old, discolored foam padding, was a metal sphere about the size of a baseball. It was silver, almost perfectly smooth except for some kind of symbol or marking etched into its surface. A design I didn't recognize, like interconnected triangles forming a pattern that made my eyes hurt if I looked at it too long. But what struck me immediately was the warmth. The sphere was warm to the touch, not hot enough to burn, but definitely warmer than it should have been sitting in a box all this time. And it seemed to be the source of the vibration I'd felt. Underneath the foam was a stack of yellowed papers covered in handwritten equations, diagrams, and notes. The handwriting was cramped and difficult to read, full of scientific symbols and terminology I couldn't begin to understand. I flipped through them briefly, seeing sketches that looked like atomic structures and pages of calculations. I picked up the sphere, and the vibration intensified. It felt almost alive in my hand, pulsing gently. The surface had an odd quality to it, not quite slippery, not quite sticky, but something in between. And was it just me, or did it seem to glow slightly? Not enough to light up the room, but there was a subtle luminescence that seemed to come from within. I was completely fascinated. I took more pictures, this time of the sphere and some of the papers, and posted them in a few Reddit groups, r what is this thing, r mildly interesting, and a science forum I sometimes lurk in. I wrote a quick description of how I found it and asked if anyone had any ideas what it might be. While waiting for responses, I kept examining the papers. Some had dates from 1956 and 1957. There were mentions of sample B137 and controlled reaction and other phrases that meant nothing to me. One diagram showed what looked like the sphere connected to some kind of larger apparatus. The comments started rolling in on my posts. Most were jokes or pop culture references. Congrats, you found the Allspark. That's how horror movies start. Looks like a prop from a sci-fi film. But then one comment made my blood run cold. Get rid of it. It's radioactive. I laughed it off at first. Of course someone would say that. It looks like something from a B-movie about nuclear monsters. But then I got a private message from a user called Nuclear Safety Expert. I work in radiation safety, based on the design, age, and your description of warmth and vibration. I'm concerned this might be a beryllium sphere containing a radioactive isotope, possibly from early nuclear research. Do not handle it further. Place it in a safe location away from living spaces and contact your local authorities. I'm serious. My hands started shaking. I looked at the sphere still sitting on my counter, remembering how I'd carried it around, held it in my bare hands. I'd been touching it on and off for over an hour by this point. I quickly found a pair of oven mitts and a plastic storage container. Following the Reddit user's instructions, I carefully placed the sphere, the papers, and the original box into the container, snapped the lid on, and carried the whole thing out to my detached garage, placing it as far from the house as possible. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The operator seemed skeptical at first, but when I mentioned potential radioactive material, her tone changed completely. She transferred me to someone else, who asked detailed questions about where I got the item and what it looked like. They told me to stay out of the garage and that a team would be dispatched right away. I sat on my front steps, sweating in the July heat, but too afraid to go back inside my potentially contaminated apartment. Within 45 minutes, 2 unmarked vans pulled up. 4 people in what looked like hazmat suits got out, along with 2 men in regular clothes who identified themselves as from the Department of Energy. They asked me more questions, while the team in suits went to my garage with equipment I later learned were Geiger counters and other radiation detection devices. One of the suits came back and spoke quietly to the men questioning me. His face was grave. "Ms. Collins," one of the men said, "you were right to call us. The object is indeed radioactive, emitting unsafe levels of gamma radiation. We need to secure it immediately. We'll also need to check your home and car for contamination." The next few hours were a blur. They confiscated the sphere, the papers, and even the container I'd put them in. They swept my apartment and car with their equipment, finding elevated radiation levels on my kitchen counter and the passenger seat of my car. They told me I needed to have both professionally decontaminated. When I asked about my own exposure, they were frustratingly vague. One of them finally admitted I'd likely been exposed to higher than normal but not immediately dangerous levels of radiation. They recommended I see my doctor for blood tests and monitoring. Before they left, I asked what exactly the sphere was. The older of the 2 men sighed. "Based on preliminary analysis and the documentation, it appears to be a sample from early nuclear weapons research, a beryllium sphere housing radioactive material, likely plutonium. It was designed to be a small-scale model for testing theories about implosion triggers. How it ended up in a private residence, that's what we need to investigate." They took my contact information and promised to follow up, but I never heard from them again. When I called the Department of Energy the following week, they had no record of the incident. When I insisted, they eventually transferred me to someone who curtly informed me the matter was resolved and that I would be contacted if necessary. I went to my doctor, who referred me to a specialist in radiation exposure. More tests, more vague reassurances that my exposure was likely minimal and not cause for immediate concern. But they enrolled me in a monitoring program anyway. I still go in for blood tests every 3 months. I tried to track down the yard sale woman again, but the house was empty when I drove by. A neighbor told me she'd moved to a retirement community in Tampa, but didn't know which one. I've spent countless hours researching nuclear history, trying to make sense of what happened. From what I can piece together, the sphere was probably part of research related to the Manhattan Project or its immediate aftermath. How it ended up in an old lady's attic in Pinecrest, Florida, I still don't know. I haven't been to a yard sale since. I check my radiation detector app obsessively. I've thrown away the clothes I was wearing that day, replaced my kitchen counter, and had my car professionally cleaned 3 times. But I still don't feel safe. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can feel that strange vibration in my hands again. And I wonder, how many other dangerous relics from our nuclear past are sitting in attics and garages across the country, just waiting to be discovered? Story 17. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 months since the calls stopped, but I'm sharing this because I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy. I've tried therapy, medication, even moved to a different apartment, but I can't shake the feeling that whoever was behind this is still out there, waiting. I work as a sales associate at Lakeside BMW in Westlake. Nothing special about the job except that I'm pretty good at it. Top salesman 2 quarters in a row. Part of the job is being available for clients, which means answering calls from unknown numbers all day. You never know which call might be someone ready to drop 80 grand on a new 5 Series. The first call came on a Tuesday night around 10:30. I remember because I was watching highlights from the basketball game I'd missed. My phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, not unusual in my line of work. At first, I let it ring out. It was late, and I figured if it was important, they'd leave a message. No message came, but about 2 minutes later, the same number called again. Something about the persistence made me answer. "Hello?" I said. There was nothing but static at first, and I was about to hang up when I heard something that made my stomach drop. It was my voice, unmistakably mine, but slightly muffled under the crackling static. I recognized exactly what I was hearing. It was me talking to a client named Marcus earlier that day about financing options on an X5. I remember the conversation clearly because he'd been indecisive about the trim level. "Hello? Who is this?" I demanded, but there was no response, just my voice continuing to play back at me. I hung up immediately, my heart racing. My first thought was that Marcus was messing with me somehow, but that made no sense. Why would a potential client record our conversation and play it back? I called him the next morning, casually asking if he'd called me the previous night. He sounded genuinely confused and denied it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone at the dealership playing a prank. Maybe some weird technical glitch where my voicemail system was malfunctioning. I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Then the second call came the following night, around the same time. Different number, same static. But this time it was me talking to a woman who'd come in that day about a trade-in value for her old Audi. Only my side of the conversation was audible. What freaked me out even more was that this was a walk-in client. We hadn't spoken on the phone at all. Someone had to have been physically present to record me. I hung up and immediately checked all my doors and windows. I live alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, but I triple-checked the locks anyway and left the lights on all night. The next day at work, I was jumpy and distracted. I kept looking around, wondering if someone was watching me, recording my conversations. My manager asked if I was feeling okay. I lied and said I wasn't sleeping well. That night, another call. Different number again. This time it was me talking to my coworker about a difficult customer, a private conversation we'd had in the break room. I felt sick. Someone was following me, listening to everything I said, and then calling me at night to let me know they were watching. By the 4th night, I was a complete wreck. I'd started taking different routes home, checking my car for tracking devices, and even looking for hidden cameras in my apartment. The calls kept coming, always around 10:30, always from different numbers, always my voice from earlier that day. I tried blocking the numbers, but it was useless since they never used the same one twice. I tried not answering, but then I'd just sit there staring at my phone as it rang, knowing what was on the other end. The few times I let it go to voicemail, no message was left. On the 6th night, I decided to record the call as evidence. When the phone rang, I answered and immediately hit record on my laptop. The familiar static came through, followed by my voice discussing leasing terms with a client from that morning. I asked questions into the phone. "Who are you? "What do you want from me?" But got no response, just the playback of my own voice. I took the recording to the police the next day. The officer listened politely, but didn't seem concerned. "Sounds like someone's playing a prank on you," he said. "Unless there's a direct threat, there's not much we can do." He suggested I change my number. By this point, I was barely functioning. I'd started sleeping in my car some nights, parked in well-lit public places, just to feel safe. At work, I was becoming increasingly paranoid about who might be listening. I stopped having personal conversations with coworkers and kept client interactions as brief as possible. I started barricading my bedroom door at night, pushing my dresser in front of it. I bought a baseball bat that I kept by my bed. I was checking over my shoulder constantly, convinced I was being followed. The calls continued every night for exactly 1 week. Same time, different numbers, always my voice from earlier that day. Then, on the 8th night, nothing. No call came. Somehow, that was even worse. The break in the pattern terrified me. What did it mean? Were they done with me or planning something worse? I waited up all night, jumping at every sound, the bat clutched in my sweaty hands. Morning came, and I called in sick to work. I couldn't face going in, couldn't bear the thought of someone recording every word I said. That day, I finally did what I should have done from the beginning. I changed my number. The process was quick, and I felt a small sense of relief. Only my parents, my boss, and 2 close friends got the new number. I slept better that night, thinking maybe it was over. Then, on the 3rd night with my new number, my phone rang at exactly 10:30. Unknown number. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely answer. When I did, there was no static this time, no recording of my voice. Instead, a distorted, electronically altered voice simply said, "James." "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" "We've been watching you, James," the voice continued, ignoring my questions. "Listening. Why? What did I do? Is this about a car? I can get you a deal if that's what you want." I was babbling, desperate. "It's not about the cars, James." "Then what? Money?" "I don't have much, but I can give you what I've got. Just leave me alone." I was practically begging now. 11 o'clock tomorrow night, the voice said. "Be ready." "Ready for what? What's happening at 11? My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "We're coming to collect, James." "Collect what? I don't understand." "Look, I live at 1742 Westbrook Avenue, apartment 3B. I'll leave money in an envelope under the mat. Just take it and leave me alone." I was so scared I gave my address without thinking. 11 o'clock, the voice repeated, then the line went dead. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. What had I done? I'd just given my address to whoever had been stalking me. Panic set in, and I started, throwing clothes into a bag, planning to go to a hotel for the night. Then I stopped. No, I couldn't keep running. This had to end. I went to my closet and pulled out the small lockbox where I kept my Glock 19. I'm not a gun person, never have been, but my dad insisted I keep one for protection when I moved to the city. I'd fired it exactly twice at a range and kept it locked away ever since. Now I was grateful to have it. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety. I called in sick again, couldn't face work. I kept the blinds drawn and jumped at every sound in the hallway. By 10:30 that night, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the gun loaded in front of me, staring at the door. 11 o'clock came and went. Nothing happened. No knock at the door, no phone call, nothing. I sat there until 3 in the morning, the gun in my sweaty hand, before exhaustion finally overtook me and I fell asleep at the table. I woke up stiff and disoriented as sunlight streamed through the blinds. Nothing had happened. No one had come. But when I checked my phone, I had one new voicemail from an unknown number, received at exactly 11 o'clock the previous night. With trembling fingers, I played it. It was a compilation of snippets of my voice from the past week, stitched together to form new sentences I never actually said. I'm losing my mind, hearing things, seeing things, just like my father before they took him away. My blood ran cold. My father had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when I was 12. He'd spent years in and out of institutions before he died. It wasn't something I talked about often, certainly not at work or with clients. How could they possibly know? That was 3 months ago. The calls stopped completely after that night. I've changed my number twice more, moved to a new apartment, even switched dealerships. I've been seeing a therapist who specializes in anxiety disorders, and I'm on medication that helps me sleep. But I still check, over my shoulder. I still keep the blinds drawn. I still flinch when my phone rings. And sometimes, late at night, I could swear I hear static on the line even when no one's there. The worst part is not knowing why. Why me? What did they want? Was it all just some sick game? Or was it something else entirely? And if they found me once, what's to stop them from finding me again? The doctors have suggested that stress triggered a hereditary condition, that maybe the calls weren't real, that I imagined the whole thing. Sometimes I almost believe them. It would be easier that way. But then I remember the recordings, my voice saying things I never said, and I know that somewhere out there, someone is still listening, still waiting, and I have no idea when they'll call again. Story 18. I never believed in the paranormal. I was the guy who'd roll his eyes at ghost stories, who'd explain away haunted noises as old pipes or settling foundations. But that was before we moved into the house on Oakwood Drive, before my daughter started talking to someone who wasn't there, before I felt it breathing on me. We'd been so excited about the move. Emma and I had saved for years to afford a place in this neighborhood. Good schools, quiet streets, the whole suburban dream. The previous owners had maintained it well, and though it was built in the 1970s, everything had been updated. The realtor mentioned something about the previous family leaving suddenly, but we didn't think much of it. Job relocation happens all the time, right? Lily, our 5-year-old, picked her bedroom right away, the one with the bay window overlooking the backyard. She'd never had her own room before, and she was over the moon about decorating it with her unicorn posters and stuffed animals. For the first couple of weeks, everything was perfect. We were unpacking, settling in, meeting neighbors. Normal family stuff. Then I heard Lily talking in her room one night when I was walking past. Nothing weird about that. Kids her age have imaginary friends. But when I paused outside her door, I heard her pause, like she was listening. Then she giggled and said, "That's silly. My daddy doesn't know how to fly." I pushed the door open, expecting to find her on the phone with a friend, or maybe my mom. But she was alone, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Who were you talking to, sweetie?" I asked. She looked up at me like I was being ridiculous. "The lady," she said, pointing to the empty corner of her room. "She lives here too." My skin prickled a bit, but I brushed it off. "Well, tell your friend it's almost bedtime," I said, and kissed her goodnight. I mentioned it to Emma, who said it was perfectly normal. "Remember when you told me you had an imaginary friend named Captain Rocket when you were little?" She laughed. "The lady in the corner sounds much less demanding." But over the next week, I kept catching snippets of these conversations. Lily would go quiet mid-sentence, like she was listening, then respond to questions I couldn't hear. One night I heard her say, "I can't go there. Daddy says I'm not allowed in the attic. We don't have an accessible attic." That's when I started paying more attention. I'd check on her more frequently, and every time I'd open the door, she'd be alone, but in mid-conversation. Sometimes she'd look slightly annoyed at being interrupted. Once I walked in, and she was standing on her bed, reaching toward the ceiling. "What are you doing, Lily?" I asked. "The lady wanted to hold my hand," she said simply. That night was when it happened to me. I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I woke up around 3 in the morning with the distinct feeling that something was wrong. I tried to roll over to check the time, but I couldn't move. Not a finger, not an eyelid, nothing. It was like my entire body was encased in cement. I've since learned this is called sleep paralysis. It's supposedly caused by your brain waking up before your body does. But what I felt that night wasn't just paralysis. It was a presence. I could feel something in the room with us. Something heavy and cold that seemed to press down on the air itself. I tried to call out to Emma, sleeping peacefully beside me, but my throat was frozen too. That's when I felt it, a breath against my ear. Soft at first, like someone checking if I was awake, then louder, more deliberate, a long, drawn-out exhale that raised the hair on my neck and sent ice down my spine. I was screaming inside my head, begging my body to move, to wake Emma, to do anything. But I was trapped, forced to lie there as the breathing grew louder, closer, until it felt like whatever it was had its mouth pressed right against my ear. And then, just like that, it stopped. The weight lifted, and I gasped for air, finally able to move again. I sat bolt upright, flicked on the lamp, and scanned the room. Nothing. Emma stirred beside me. "What's wrong?" she mumbled. I couldn't tell her, couldn't find the words. "Nothing," I said. "Bad dream." But I knew it wasn't a dream, and I knew somehow that whatever had been breathing in my ear was the same lady who'd been talking to my daughter. The next morning, after Emma left for work and I'd dropped Lily at kindergarten, I went into my daughter's room and closed the door behind me. I felt ridiculous, standing there in an empty room, but I was also angry, scared. This was my house, my family. "Listen," I said aloud, feeling equal parts stupid and terrified. "I don't know who or what you are, but you need to leave. This is our home now, and you're not welcome here. You stay away from my daughter. You stay away from my wife. You stay away from me. If you don't, I swear I'll get a priest in here so fast your head will spin." I wasn't religious, but it was the only threat I could think of that might work on a ghost or whatever this thing was. The air felt different afterward, lighter somehow, and for a while things went back to normal. Lily stopped mentioning the lady. No more one-sided conversations. No more sleep paralysis episodes for me. We thought it was over. We were wrong. 5 months later, just enough time for us to let our guard down, Lily started having nightmares. Bad ones that had her waking up screaming. We tried everything, night lights, leaving her door open, checking under the bed and in the closet before bedtime. Nothing helped. So we moved her to the guest bedroom on the other side of the house, thinking maybe there was something about her original room that was triggering the bad dreams. The first night in her new room, she seemed fine. The second night too. On the third night, around midnight, I woke to the sound of her crying. I found her sitting up in bed, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaming down her face. When I sat down beside her, she wouldn't look at me. She was staring fixedly at the upper corner of the room. "What's wrong, Lily Pad?" I asked, using my nickname for her. "She's up there," Lily whispered, pointing. Every hair on my body stood on end. "Who's up there, sweetie?" Lily's finger shifted, now pointing directly at the ceiling above her bed. The lady, she followed me. I looked up, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing but white ceiling paint and the glow from her nightlight. I pulled Lily into my arms, feeling her little heart hammering against my chest. "It's okay," I lied. "There's nobody there." "She's mad at you," Lily murmured into my shirt. "She says you were mean to her." My confrontation in her old bedroom flashed through my mind. I felt sick, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Listen to me, Lily. If you see her again, you tell her that Daddy said she has to leave. This is our house now." Lily shook her head, fresh tears spilling. "She says it's her house. She was here first." I stood up, still, holding Lily, and looked directly at the corner where she'd been pointing. "I told you before," I said firmly. "You're not welcome here. Leave my daughter alone, or I'll make you leave." The night light flickered, just once. Maybe it was a power surge, maybe it wasn't. I carried Lily to our bedroom, where Emma was already awake and worried. We put Lily between us, and I left the hallway light on and the door open. None of us slept much. The next day I called 3 different churches before I found a priest willing to come bless the house. Father Matthews arrived that evening, a kind-faced older man who didn't seem at all fazed when I awkwardly explained our situation. "It's more common than you might think," he said gently. "Especially with children in the house. They're more sensitive to these things." He walked through every room with holy water and prayers, paying special attention to both of Lily's bedrooms. When he finished, he gave us a small silver cross to hang in Lily's room and told us to call him if anything else happened. For 2 weeks, things were calm. Lily moved back to her original bedroom without incident. No more mentions of the lady, no more nightmares. I started to think maybe it had all been in our heads, stress from the move, an overactive imagination, sleep paralysis triggered by anxiety. Then last night happened. I was up late working in my home office when I heard Lily's door creak open. I glanced at the clock, 1:30 in the morning. Thinking she was just going to the bathroom, I waited to hear the bathroom door open, but instead, I heard her little footsteps heading toward the staircase. I found her standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up. "Lily?" I called softly. "What are you doing up, sweetie?" She didn't turn around. "She wants to show me something," she said, her voice oddly flat. I rushed forward and scooped her up, and that's when I felt it. The same cold, heavy presence from my sleep paralysis episode. It filled the entryway like an invisible fog pressing against my skin. Lily went rigid in my arms. "Go away," I shouted at the empty air. "I warned you." The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. The overhead light began to flicker wildly, and from upstairs came a loud thump like something heavy had fallen. I ran back to our bedroom with Lily, woke Emma, and we all piled into the car in our pajamas. We spent the night at a hotel. This morning, I called Father Matthews again, and he's coming back tomorrow with 2 other priests for a more thorough blessing. I don't know if it will work. I don't know what this thing is or why it's so fixated on my daughter. All I know is that I won't let it have her. We're staying with Emma's parents until after the blessing, and if that doesn't work, I don't know. We might have to move again, even though we can't really afford to. The worst part is that I still don't know what it wanted to show Lily at the top of those stairs. And sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, I catch her whispering to the empty air beside her, her lips barely moving. "Who are you talking to?" I asked her this afternoon. She glanced at me, then away. "Nobody," she said. But her eyes flicked to the side, just for an instant, like she was checking if someone was listening. "I've started researching the history of our house. So far, I haven't found anything unusual. No tragic deaths, no missing persons. But I know something is there. Something that was there before us, that thinks the house belongs to it. Something that wants my daughter. And I'm terrified that next time, I might not wake up in time to stop it.